Hey there, tonight we're diving into the secretive world of Egyptian pharaohs and their crafty survival of assassination plots. What you're about to discover is that these rulers weren't just adorned with gold, but also with an arsenal of cunning strategies that would make even the most seasoned spy nod in appreciation. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You're in ancient Egypt, and your life as a pharaoh is a high-stakes game of survival where assassination attempts are as predictable as the Nile's flooding. It's a world where the crown on your head feels more like a target than a symbol of divine power. Welcome to the early dynastic era, where being a ruler means mastering the art of not getting killed. Let's start with Narmer, the OG of Egyptian pharaohs. Around 3100 BCE, Narmer was the guy who thought, why not unify Upper and Lower Egypt? So, he did just that, becoming the first king of a united Egypt. But being the top cat in the kingdom wasn't just about wearing fancy headgear and having people fan you with palm leaves. No, it was a daily struggle to keep your head attached to your shoulders. In those early days, assassination plots were as much a part of royal life as building pyramids. Why? Because power, my friend, is a double-edged sword. Narmer, for instance, might have had a fancy name and a cool ceremonial palette. You know, the Narmer palette, which is basically ancient Egypt's version of a LinkedIn profile. But he also had to sleep with one eye open. His throne was as shaky as a reed boat on the Nile, and betrayal was as common as sandstorms. Now, let's dive into the security measures that kept our friend Narmer and his successors from becoming ancient history before their time. For starters, these pharaohs had an entourage that would make a modern celebrity blush. They employed bodyguards, often chosen from elite military units. These guys weren't just muscle. They were the ancient equivalent of Secret Service agents, trained to spot a threat faster than you can say, divine kingship. But muscles aren't the only thing keeping you alive in this brutal game. There's propaganda, divine propaganda, to be precise. You had to convince everyone that you were not just any ruler, you were a god on earth. Narmer and his successors mastered this art. Imagine walking into a room and every wall screams, "This guy is literally the sun god's best buddy." If people believe that the gods have your back, they're less likely to try to stab you in yours. Fast forward to Djoser, around 2670 BCE, and the security measures have evolved. Djoser is known for his step pyramid at Saqqara, but let's not get distracted by the architecture. While the pyramid is a marvel, it's also a symbol of power and a fortress of sorts. The construction of these monumental tombs wasn't just about showing off wealth. It was a statement of divine protection and a deterrent against potential usurpers. You try assassinating someone who's convinced they have a direct line to the afterlife. Djoser's reign also saw the rise of a powerful figure, Imhotep, his vizier. Think of Imhotep as the ancient world's Steve Jobs, minus the turtlenecks. He was an architect, physician, and all-around genius who helped solidify Djoser's legacy. Having someone like Imhotep in your corner was like having a human Swiss Army knife, ready to solve problems, from designing defenses to managing state affairs. Of course, no amount of divine propaganda or pyramid building would be complete without a healthy dose of paranoia. You couldn't just trust anyone, not even your family. Royal family drama makes your average soap opera look like a picnic. Brothers, cousins, uncles, they all had eyes on the throne. It was like Game of Thrones, but with more eyeliner and fewer dragons. Djoser had to navigate these treacherous waters with the skill of a seasoned diplomat and the caution of a hunted animal. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would want this job in the first place. Well, power is intoxicating, and ruling Egypt meant having control over the most fertile land in the ancient world. With the Nile as your life source, you had the keys to a kingdom that was the envy of all its neighbors. Plus, let's not forget the wealth. Gold, jewels, and a one-way ticket to immortality in the afterlife made the risks seem worth it. But let's not romanticize it too much. Life as a pharaoh was a constant balancing act between divine right and human vulnerability. Even the most carefully laid plans could be undone by a well-placed dagger. The legend of the untouchable ruler was as much a product of clever storytelling as it was of genuine power. So, as you lay your head down in your intricately carved tomb, surrounded by gold and the scent of incense, remember that survival in this world wasn't just about divine favor or brute strength. It was about outsmarting your enemies, both in life and in the history books. Because in ancient Egypt, staying alive meant writing your own story before someone else wrote you out of it. As the sands settled on the Old Kingdom's pyramids, we step into the Middle Kingdom, the Dynasty, where political maneuvering was practically an Olympic sport. By around 2055 BCE, pharaohs had become masters of surviving not just sandstorms, but also a whirlwind of backstabbing and betrayal. This era was a masterclass in the high-stakes chess game of survival, and the board was littered with political pawns, knights, and the odd sacrificial lamb. The Middle Kingdom was a time when pharaohs needed more than divine favor to keep their heads above the proverbial waters of the Nile. The economic landscape was as fertile as the delta itself, but it was also a breeding ground for discontent. Think about it. Controlling the Nile's bounty was like holding the world's biggest buffet, and everyone wanted a seat at the table. This wealth attracted not just friends, but a host of frenemies, both within and outside of Egypt's borders. Before you scoff at the drama, consider the fact that the pharaohs had to manage a complex web of alliances and rivalries, often with people who were just as ambitious as they were. The political climate was harder than a midday sun in the Sahara, and pharaohs had to be as shrewd as they were sacred. This wasn't just about keeping the peace. It was about ensuring that no one else decided to play king of the hill, or in this case, king of the pyramid. Enter the vizier, the ancient world's answer to a Swiss army knife. This guy was the multitasking MVP, the chief of staff who made sure the whole kingdom didn't go up in flames while the pharaoh was busy being divine. The vizier was the eyes, ears, and sometimes the fists of the pharaoh, a position that could make or break a reign. If you ever find yourself in a time machine back to the Middle Kingdom, you do well to buddy up to the vizier. That is, if you want to avoid an untimely encounter with a cobra in your bed. Now, let's talk economics, because nothing says power like a well-managed treasury. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom understood that wealth wasn't just about hoarding gold and jewels. It was about distributing resources wisely to keep the populace happy, or at least not sharpening their pitchforks. The state controlled vast agricultural lands, and the pharaohs were like the ultimate landlords, collecting taxes to fund their kingdoms and those ambitious building projects. This was a time when the economic policies could make you a hero or a villain, depending on which side of the tax collector's ledger you found yourself. But here's the kicker. Despite the economic boom, the pharaohs were still popular targets for assassination. Why? Because power, like that shiny gold jewelry, was coveted by many. And while the pharaohs were spending nights in their opulent palaces dreaming of eternal life, there were plenty of folks plotting to cut that dream short. You see, being a pharaoh was like being the lead in a soap opera where everyone had a dagger hidden behind their back. And let's not forget the espionage, because what's a Game of Thrones without a little spycraft? The pharaohs' intelligence networks were the ancient equivalent of MI6, complete with secret agents and double-crossers. These were the unsung heroes and villains who swapped secrets like they were trading baseball cards. Information was currency, and knowing who wanted you dead was just as important as knowing who was loyal. If the pharaohs taught us anything, it's that intelligence is the best armor when your enemies are plotting from the shadows. But perhaps the most mind-boggling part is how these pharaohs managed to maintain an air of untouchability while navigating this cutthroat world. They had a knack for spinning tales that painted them as gods among men, untouchable and infallible. It was a narrative as carefully constructed as the pyramids themselves, and it worked mostly. The allure of divine kingship was a potent one, and as long as the pharaohs kept that image intact, their enemies had to think twice before pulling the metaphorical trigger. In the Middle Kingdom, the pharaohs were more than just rulers. They were symbols of a complex society where power was as fleeting as the desert breeze. With every assassination plot they dodged, they cemented their legacy in the annals of history. And while we might romanticize their reigns today, it's crucial to remember that these rulers were, above all, survivors in a world where the stakes were as high as the pyramids they built. As the Middle Kingdom fades into the sands of time, we stride confidently into the New Kingdom, around 1550 BCE, where pharaohs were more than just survivalists. They were architects of legacy. Enter Ramses II and Hatshepsut, two rulers with more swagger than a rock star, and the architectural ambitions to match. These weren't just rulers, they were brand creators, with a penchant for monumental architecture and military showmanship that would make even the most seasoned Instagram influencer green with envy. Let's kick things off with Hatshepsut, a name as commanding as her reign. She wasn't just any pharaoh. She was a female pharaoh, which in the male-dominated world of ancient Egypt was about as rare as a snowstorm in the Sahara. Hatshepsut knew that to survive and thrive, she needed to play the long game. Her strategy, monumental architecture that screamed power and permanence. Take her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri, a sprawling complex that was more about making a statement than just preparing for the afterlife. This wasn't just a tomb. It was a political manifesto carved in stone, designed to outlast any critique or rival dynasty. Now, you might wonder, why build something so grand just to hold your mummified remains? Well, it's all about legacy, my friend. In a world where your name could be erased from history with the stroke of a chisel, Hatshepsut's temple was her insurance policy against oblivion. It shouted, "I was here, and I mattered." And if that wasn't enough, her trading expeditions to Punt were the ancient equivalent of a PR campaign. By bringing back exotic goods like incense and myrrh, she wasn't just boosting the economy. She was reinforcing her image as a ruler blessed by the gods themselves. Speaking of divine favor, let's not forget the myth versus reality of their so-called godly status. Pharaohs were considered gods on earth, but let's be real. This divine narrative was as much about political survival as it was about spiritual belief. The pharaohs had to convince their subjects that to mess with them was to mess with the cosmic order. And what better way to do that than with a little godly PR? But beneath the divine veneer was the harsh reality. These rulers were as mortal as the rest of us, and their power was precarious. The myth of divine kingship was a carefully curated image, a way to keep the masses loyal and the daggers at bay. Now, onto Ramses II, the man, the myth, the legend. Known as Ramses the Great, he was the pharaoh who took legacy building to a whole new level. His reign, which stretched over 66 years, was like one long highlight reel of victories and architectural feats. If you've ever seen the temples of Abu Simbel, you've witnessed Ramses' penchant for going big or going home. These colossal statues were more than just rock-hewn selfies. They were power symbols meant to impress and intimidate. They said, "I am Ramses, and don't you forget it." But Ramses wasn't just about building big. He was about thinking big, too. Take the Battle of Kadesh, for instance, fought around 1274 BCE against the Hittites. It was one of the largest chariot battles ever recorded, and despite its indecisive outcome, Ramses spun it into a glorious victory through a masterful propaganda campaign. His accounts of the battle etched into temple walls were like the ancient world's version of a blockbuster action film. The message was clear. Ramses was a warrior king, a hero of epic proportions. In reality, the battle was more of a stalemate. But hey, why let the truth get in the way of a good story? In the economic context, these monumental projects weren't just about vanity. They were massive public works that kept the economy humming and the people employed. The construction of temples and monuments required a workforce that rivaled the population of a small city. Imagine thousands of workers, craftsmen, artisans, all toiling away in the desert heat to bring the pharaoh's vision to life. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about creating a legacy that would employ and feed the masses, keeping the social order intact. Moreover, these projects were a clever distraction from the ever-present threat of assassination. While enemies plotted and schemed, Ramses and Hatshepsut were busy immortalizing themselves in stone, diverting attention from the palace intrigues. Their monumental legacies were like a magician's flourish. Look over here at this grand temple, not over there where the political knives are being sharpened. As we delve deeper into the New Kingdom, it becomes clear that pharaohs like Ramses and Hatshepsut were masters of the art of survival, not just through brute force, but through the manipulation of image and legacy. Their reigns were not just about dodging daggers, but about crafting a narrative that would stand the test of time. In their world, survival wasn't just a matter of outliving your enemies. It was about outlasting them in the annals of history. And as we move forward, remember, the story of these pharaohs is far from over. Because in the Game of Thrones that was ancient Egypt, the only thing more dangerous than ruling was being forgotten. As we tiptoe into the tumultuous late period of ancient Egypt, you can practically hear the knives being sharpened in the background. This era, stretching from around 664 BCE to 332 BCE, was like a historical blender set on high, full of foreign invasions, civil unrest, and enough assassination plots to make a spy novelist blush. Pharaohs were constantly looking over their shoulders, not just at the looming threat of a coup, but also at the arrival of foreign powers knocking at the gates like unwanted house guests who never got the hint. Enter Nectanebo Roman II, the last native pharaoh of Egypt, reigning from 360 to 343 BCE. If ancient Egypt were a soap opera, Nectanebo would be the character juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. His era was a mix of internal chaos and external threats, with the Persian Empire eyeing Egypt like a lion eyes a particularly plump gazelle. Yet, in the face of danger, Nectanebo didn't just sit around waiting for the end credits. Instead, he became a master of diplomacy, a chess player in a world of checkers. Now, let's talk about Nectanebo's secret weapon, alliances. You see, when you're a pharaoh with enemies at every turn, it helps to have a Rolodex full of potential friends, or at least frenemies. Nectanebo Roman II knew the value of a strategic alliance better than anyone. He was the ancient world's equivalent of a linked-in power user, forging ties with Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta, who were all too happy to lend him mercenaries in exchange for a little Egyptian gold. These mercenaries were the creme de la creme of ancient combat, professional soldiers who knew their way around a battlefield better than most knew their way around a pyramid. Speaking of mercenaries, let's not romanticize these guys too much. They were less knights in shining armor and more swords for hire. But hey, when your throne's on the line, you take what you can get. The costs were astronomical, literally thousands of gold talents. But Nectanebo knew that sometimes you have to spend money to make sure you stay alive long enough to spend more money later. These mercenary armies were like an ancient insurance policy, albeit one that came with a hefty premium and the occasional betrayal clause. But Nectanebo wasn't just relying on brawn. He had brains, too. Espionage was practically a national pastime in his court. Information was power, and Nectanebo had a network of spies that would make modern intelligence agencies nod in approval. These agents slipped through the shadows, gathering intel from enemy courts, listening for whispers of rebellion, and ensuring that Nectanebo was always 3 steps ahead of his adversaries. It was cloak and dagger stuff, literally and figuratively, and it was as thrilling as it was necessary. However, espionage and alliances weren't just about self-preservation. They were part of a broader economic strategy. The late period was a time when Egypt's economy was like a roller coaster with a penchant for the occasional loop-de-loop. Foreign trade was crucial, and Nectanebo knew that a stable reign meant a stable economy. By keeping the Persian threat at bay and maintaining internal stability, he ensured that trade routes remained open and the coffers full. This was no small feat when your neighbors were as friendly as a crocodile in a bad mood. Of course, for every cunning plan, there was the harsh reality of human ambition. Nectanebo's reign was not free from internal dissent. Just because he had a knack for diplomacy and espionage didn't mean everyone was thrilled with his rule. The pharaoh had to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, where every smile hid a potential dagger. It was a bit like playing musical chairs, but with fewer chairs and more sharp objects. And let's not forget the mythology that surrounded these pharaohs. Even in the late period, the divine narrative was alive and well. Nectanebo, like his predecessors, was seen as a god on earth, a living Horus. This divine status was not just ceremonial fluff, it was a political tool. It was a reminder to his subjects, and to his enemies, that his rule was sanctioned by the divine order. But beneath the gilded facade, the pharaohs were all too human, mortal men facing immortal challenges. Intriguingly, Nectanebo's legacy also seeped into the realm of legend. Later stories and myths would cast him as a powerful magician, a testament to the lasting impact of his rule and the allure of his mystique. This blending of history and myth is a reminder of how the stories we tell shape the leaders we remember. In reality, Nectanebo was a pragmatic ruler, a survivor in an age where survival was anything but guaranteed. Yet, despite his efforts, Nectanebo Roman II reign came to an end with the Persian conquest of Egypt in 343 BCE. He fled to Nubia, leaving behind a kingdom that would soon fall under foreign rule. But before you shed a tear for our ancient strategist, consider this. Nectanebo's story is one of resilience and adaptability, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to fight against overwhelming odds. He may have lost his throne, but his legacy endures, a symbol of a nation's struggle for autonomy in a world where power was as fleeting as the Nile's floodwaters. As we look back at the late period, we're reminded that history is a tapestry of triumphs and tragedies, a dance of power and politics where the stakes were as high as the pyramids themselves. Nectanebo's story is but one thread in this rich tapestry, a narrative that continues to unfold, leading us inexorably toward the next chapter in Egypt's storied history. And as the curtain falls on this act, we prepare to turn the page, knowing full well that the sands of time have many more stories to tell. And as the curtain falls on Nectanebo's reign, it's almost poetic how the sands of Egypt, always shifting and never quite still, mirror the legacy of its pharaohs. These rulers, from Nama to Nectanebo, have been immortalized by time and tales, their stories as enduring as the pyramids that dart the landscape. But let's not get lost in the romance of it all, because, dear listeners, while history loves a good yarn, it's our job to untangle the myth from the reality. You see, the pharaohs have been cast in the spotlight for millennia, their lives and legends amplified by modern media, turning them into almost mythic figures. Take Cleopatra, for instance, a name synonymous with seduction and political savvy. Her story has been told and retold, from Shakespearean dramas to Hollywood blockbusters, painting her as an enchanting femme fatale. But if we peel back the layers of gold leaf and eyeliner, what we find is a savvy ruler, fluent in multiple languages and skilled in the art of diplomacy. Cleopatra wasn't just a pretty face. She was a strategist who played the political game with the best of them. Yet, it's the romanticized version that often sticks, a testament to the power of storytelling over reality. And then there's Tutankhamun, the boy king whose tomb discovery in 1922 by Howard Carter became one of the greatest archaeological finds in history. The media frenzy that followed was like an ancient version of going viral. But while the treasures of his tomb dazzled the world, Tutankhamun's actual reign was short and relatively uneventful. His fame today owes more to the allure of buried treasure and the so-called curse of the pharaohs than to any political achievements. The curse, by the way, is about as real as a sandcastle in a monsoon, but it sure makes for a catchy headline. Let's not ignore Ramses Roman II, who, thanks to his penchant for self-promotion, is often remembered as the epitome of the mighty pharaoh. His image was carved into every stone that could hold a chisel, and he lived long enough to see his legend grow in his own time. But Ramses was also a master of spin. His so-called victory at the Battle of Kadesh was more marketing than military triumph. Yet this portrayal of invincibility has persisted, a reminder of how those in power often control the narrative. Modern media has certainly played its part in shaping our perceptions. The film industry, in particular, has a knack for highlighting the grandeur while glossing over the gritty bits. Movies and TV series about ancient Egypt are replete with opulent sets and dramatic plots, but they often sacrifice historical accuracy for entertainment. Pharaohs are portrayed as all-powerful, yet rarely do these stories delve into the political machinations, the economic pressures, or the relentless paranoia that came with the crown. It's like watching a magic trick without knowing how the magician actually pulled it off. But what lessons can today's leaders glean from these ancient rulers? Well, for starters, the importance of image management. Pharaohs understood the power of a well-crafted narrative long before social media influencers were a thing. They knew that how they were perceived could be as crucial as what they actually achieved. In the world of politics, perception often becomes reality, a truth as relevant now as it was then. Moreover, pharaohs were keenly aware of the necessity of balancing power with pragmatism. They surrounded themselves with advisors who weren't just yes-men, but skilled professionals who could help them navigate the complexities of governance. Today's leaders could learn a thing or two about the importance of a diverse and competent team. After all, even a deity on Earth needs a little help from time to time. And let's not overlook the economic acumen of these ancient rulers. Pharaohs understood the need for a stable economy to maintain their power. They invested in monumental projects not just for glory, but to boost employment and stimulate the economy. It's a lesson in economic stimulus that remains pertinent today, though admittedly, modern leaders might opt for infrastructure over pyramids. Finally, the pharaohs remind us of the weight of legacy. They built colossal monuments, not just as tributes to their divinity, but as a bid for immortality. They wanted to be remembered, to leave a mark that transcended their mortal lives. It's a desire that resonates through time, as leaders today strive to leave behind a legacy that endures beyond their tenure. In wrapping up this historical escapade, it's clear that the legacy of Egyptian pharaohs is a complex tapestry of myth, reality, and enduring fascination. They were masters of survival, not just through military might or divine right, but through the careful cultivation of their image and legacy. As we bid farewell to this chapter of history, we're left with the understanding that the sands of time may shift, but the stories we tell, and the truths we uncover, are what truly stand the test of time. So, next time you hear tales of Egypt's god kings, remember the romance, relish the reality, and know that the truth is often as intriguing as the myth. In the dusty cradle of ancient Persia, a region bustling with traders, warriors, and enough intrigue to fuel 1,000 Netflix series, a new voice emerged around 1500 BCE. This was the voice of Zoroaster, or Zarathustra if you're feeling fancy. Here was a man who decided that the gods of old were a bit too chaotic for his liking. Instead, he pitched something radical, a single deity, Ahura Mazda. And no, that's not a car brand, though it might make you consider divine intervention the next time your engine light comes on. Zoroaster wasn't your typical fire and brimstone prophet. He was more of the let's have a reasonable chat about good and evil type. Born into a society that was as polytheistic as a buffet is diverse, Zoroaster had his work cut out for him. Persia at the time was a melting pot of beliefs, where gods were as numerous as the stars, and every mountain had its own deity to appease. Amidst this divine cacophony, Zoroaster introduced a singular god, Ahura Mazda, a name that sounds like it's ready for a racetrack, but is actually the serene, all-knowing creator of the universe. Now, why should you care about a man and his god from 500 years ago? Well, Zoroastrianism is the world's oldest monotheistic religion, predating the Abrahamic religions by a good stretch. It set the stage for the grand narrative of cosmic dualism, the eternal struggle between good and evil. Think of it as the original episode of Good Omens, where the stakes were the fate of the universe rather than just a quirky British series. But let's backtrack a bit. What was going on in ancient Persia that made Zoroaster's teachings catch on? The region was a superhighway of ancient trade and culture, where the Silk Road wasn't just about silk, but also ideas. The political scene was a bit of a mess, with various tribes vying for control and the occasional empire rising and falling like a poorly built sandcastle. This was a time when words were as powerful as swords, and new ideas could spread like wildfire, given the right conditions. Enter Zoroaster, who, like a spiritual rock star, began preaching about a binary universe governed by truth and falsehood, good and evil, light and darkness. The core tenets of Zoroastrianism revolve around the battle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. Picture it like a cosmic chess game, where every piece moved impacts the balance of the universe. And who wouldn't want to be on the side of the benevolent creator rather than the guy who's basically the embodiment of chaos? Zoroaster's teachings were groundbreaking for several reasons. First, he emphasized the concept of free will, which was a revolutionary idea at the time. Humans, according to Zoroaster, were not pawns in the hands of capricious gods, but active participants in the cosmic struggle. This meant that moral choices actually mattered. You couldn't just sacrifice a goat and call it a day. You had to live a life of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. It was like the ultimate moral triathlon. Of course, Zoroaster's message didn't exactly go viral overnight. It took some convincing to get people on board with the idea of a single god running the show. But once it did catch on, Zoroastrianism wielded significant influence, especially during the Achaemenid Empire, where it became the state religion. Picture this. At its height, The Achaemenid Empire stretched from the Balkans to the Indus Valley, covering about 5 million square kilometers. That's a lot of territory for a god to oversee, even one as all-powerful as Ahura Mazda. Now, you might be wondering about the cultural impact. Zoroastrianism didn't just influence religious thought, it shaped the very fabric of Persian society. The emphasis on truth and righteousness seeped into the legal and social systems, setting a standard for governance that was surprisingly progressive for its time. The Achaemenid kings, including the famous Cyrus the Great, were known for their tolerance and benevolence, traits that were deeply intertwined with Zoroastrian teachings. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was that Zoroastrianism, like any major religion, had its share of adaptations and deviations over time. Different sects emerged, each with their own interpretations of Zoroaster's original teachings. And while the religion preached peace and truth, the political landscape was anything but peaceful. Empires rose and fell, wars were fought, and power was as intoxicating a pursuit as ever. In the end, Zoroaster was a man ahead of his time, a thinker who dared to challenge the status quo and offer a blueprint for a more orderly cosmos. His ideas about the duality of existence and the power of individual choice continue to resonate, echoing through the annals of history and shaping the development of subsequent religious and philosophical thought. So next time you find yourself pondering the cosmic battle of good versus evil, remember that Zoroaster was the original mastermind behind this epic struggle. And who knows, maybe Ahura Mazda is still watching over us, hoping we make the right moves in this grand game of life. As we leave Zoroaster pondering the cosmic chess game of good versus evil, let's dive into the daily grind of a Zoroastrian. You might think ancient religious practice was all incense and solemn chants, but let me assure you, there was some serious multitasking going on. Let's start with the fire temples, the spotlight of Zoroastrian worship, and quite literally too. Fire was the ultimate symbol of purity and truth, making it the spiritual equivalent of a truth serum. These temples weren't just any old shrines. They were architectural marvels that could give modern-day skyscrapers a run for their money in terms of ambition. Picture a space where sacred flames burned eternally, watched over by priests who were as much fire safety inspectors as they were spiritual guides. The fire itself wasn't just for show. Its perpetual presence symbolized the eternal light of Ahura Mazda. And maintaining these flames was no small feat. Think of it as an ancient version of keeping your smartphone charged, only with higher stakes. Now, let's talk economics, because these temples didn't build themselves, nor were they maintained by sheer divine will. They required resources, wood for the fire, priests to tend to it, and the construction of the temples themselves. Funding these operations was a bit like running a small corporation. Wealthy patrons, often local rulers or influential merchants, poured resources into these temples, ensuring their status as community hubs. The ripple effects of this were substantial. Temples became centers of not just religious life, but also economic activity, drawing in craftsmen, traders, and pilgrims. If you wanted to be someone in society, having your name associated with a temple was the ancient equivalent of a blue checkmark on Twitter. Speaking of priests, or as they were known, the Magi, these guys were the Swiss army knives of ancient Persia. They handled everything from religious ceremonies to medicine and even political advisement. Forget the image of a solitary monk in a dusty robe. The Magi were influencers in their own right, wielding power that extended far beyond the temple walls. They were the gatekeepers of knowledge at a time when literacy was a rare skill, and their influence over kings and commoners alike was formidable. But let's not pretend this was all rainbows and unicorns. The Magi, like any powerful group, could be as political as they were pious. Their role in society meant they were often involved in courtly intrigues, power plays, and the occasional scandal. Think of them as the original spin doctors, capable of turning the tide of public opinion with a well-placed prophecy or sermon. Their dual role as both spiritual leaders and political operatives was a balancing act worthy of a Cirque du Soleil performer. And then there were the sacred texts, the Gathas, composed by Zoroaster himself. These hymns were the bedrock of Zoroastrian ritual, chanted in Avestan, a language that made Latin look like a breeze. The Gathas were both poetic and philosophical, offering guidance on everything from ethical living to cosmic truths. For Zoroastrians, reciting these hymns was akin to tuning into the cosmic radio station, aligning their lives with the universal order as dictated by Ahura Mazda. The economic impact of these rituals was significant. Pilgrims and devotees brought offerings, and the temples often held large tracts of land, which they used to support their activities. This made them powerful economic entities in their own right, capable of influencing regional politics and economics. And while the romantic image of a sacred flame burning eternally is alluring, the reality of keeping that fire alive was a testament to human ingenuity and communal effort. It's important to remember that these practices didn't exist in a vacuum. They were part of a broader cultural and political landscape where the struggle for power and influence was as fierce as any battle. The Magi, with their mix of spiritual authority and worldly influence, were key players in this game, shaping the course of Persian history in ways that still echo today. As we pause here, remember that Zoroastrianism wasn't just about grand temples and high-minded philosophy. It was a living, breathing faith that shaped the daily lives of its followers, demanding both spiritual devotion and practical engagement. The stories of fire temples and the Magi offer a glimpse into how religion and reality intertwined in ancient Persia, setting the stage for the next chapter in our exploration of this fascinating world. As we pivot from the firelit temples of ancient Persia, let's dive into the grand stage of empire building under the Achaemenid rulers. Starting in 550 BCE, the Achaemenid Empire wasn't just a sprawling landmass. It was the ancient world's version of a corporate takeover, with Zoroastrianism as its unofficial brand ambassador. Picture a vast empire that stretched from the Indus Valley all the way to the Mediterranean, a whopping 5 million square kilometers. And imagine trying to keep everyone on the same page without the help of email chains or Slack channels. Enter Cyrus the Great, the empire's founding father and a master of ancient PR. Cyrus wasn't just a conqueror. He was a visionary who understood the power of a unifying ideology. And what better way to unite a diverse population than through a shared belief system? Zoroastrianism, with its emphasis on truth, order, and justice, provided the perfect ideological glue. It wasn't just about fire temples and cosmic chess games. It was about creating a cohesive moral framework that could bind an empire together. Cyrus was clever enough to see that Zoroastrianism's message of righteousness and divine justice resonated with the empire's subjects, from Babylon to Egypt. But let's not get too misty-eyed about this. The reality of ruling such a vast territory was that Cyrus needed more than just divine favor. He needed a robust administration and a healthy dose of pragmatism. His famous cylinder, often hailed as the first human rights charter, was as much a political maneuver as it was a declaration of benevolence. By allowing diverse cultures to practice their own religions under the umbrella of Zoroastrian principles, Cyrus managed to keep the peace and prevent the kind of civil unrest that could topple an empire faster than you can say insurrection. Moving on to Darius I, or Darius the Great if you're feeling formal, we see a continuation of this strategic brand management. Darius was the Steve Jobs of his time, rebranding the empire with a sleek new administrative system and a shiny bureaucracy. He divided the empire into satrapies, or provinces, each governed by a satrap, a sort of ancient CEO. To keep these mini-empires in line, Darius utilized the Royal Road, a 700-kilometer highway that was the ancient equivalent of the Internet, allowing for rapid communication across the empire. And while Darius might not have used Zoroastrianism as a blunt instrument of control, he certainly used it as a guiding principle for his administration, ensuring that his officials upheld the Zoroastrian values of honesty and justice. Now, let's talk about the occasional PR disasters that even the most meticulously planned empires face. Remember the Ionian Revolt. That's when the Greek cities in Asia Minor decided they'd had enough of Persian rule and kicked off a series of uprisings. Darius's response was swift and brutal, showcasing the harsh realities of imperial rule. While Zoroastrianism preached peace and justice, the empire's response was anything but peaceful. It was a stark reminder that the ideals of a religion don't always translate seamlessly into the policies of an empire. Meanwhile, Zoroastrianism was quietly doing its thing, seeping into the fabric of other emerging religions. The concept of a singular, all-powerful god fighting against an evil counterpart had a certain appeal, and you can see its fingerprints in the development of Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam. Picture Zoroastrianism as the original influencer, dropping hints and ideas that would later blossom into central tenets of these faiths. The idea of a final judgment, heaven and hell, and the Messiah concept are just a few examples of Zoroastrianism's enduring legacy. But let's not get too carried away with the idea of Zoroastrianism as a peaceful, unifying force. The reality was that it was as much a tool of political control as it was a spiritual guide. The Magi, those power-wielding priests we talked about earlier, played a crucial role in maintaining the religious and political status quo. They were the ones who ensured the flames kept burning, both literally and metaphorically, safeguarding the empire's spiritual integrity while navigating the treacherous waters of courtly politics. As we wrap up this section, remember that the story of the Achaemenid Empire is a tale of ambition, innovation, and the occasional misstep. It was an empire that understood the power of a unifying ideology and used religion as a cornerstone of its administration. But it was also an empire that faced the harsh realities of ruling diverse populations and the challenges of maintaining order over vast distances. Zoroastrianism, with its focus on truth and justice, was both a guiding light and a tool of empire, a dual role that would continue to shape its legacy for centuries to come. Stay tuned as we continue this journey through the annals of history, exploring how the legacy of Zoroastrianism endured beyond the fall of the Achaemenid Empire, influencing religious and cultural landscapes in ways that still echo today. As we saunter away from the Achaemenid Empire's grand tapestry of ambition and innovation, let's fast forward to a less glamorous, but no less pivotal, chapter for Zoroastrianism, the Islamic conquest of Persia in the 7th century CE. Picture this: an empire that once roared with the might of Ahura Mazda now found itself grappling with the fervent tide of Islam. The year was 651 CE, and the last Sasanian king, Yazdijerd III, was fleeing for his life. It's a bit like watching the CEO of a major corporation try to outrun a hostile takeover with nothing but a briefcase and a dream. The Rashidun Caliphate, led by caliphs who were about as subtle as a sledgehammer, wasn't just content with conquering lands. They were on a mission to spread a new religious order. In just a few decades, the once dominant Zoroastrian faith became a minority religion, sidelined in its own cradle. And here's the kicker: the transformation wasn't just about spiritual conversion. It was deeply political and economic, a seismic shift that left the Zoroastrian clergy scrambling to preserve their influence like a magician whose tricks have suddenly stopped working. Converting to Islam wasn't just a matter of faith, it was a strategic move. Muslims enjoyed certain economic privileges, including tax breaks. Picture living in a society where converting could save you a hefty chunk of change on your annual tax return. The jizya, a tax imposed on non-Muslims, was like a financial nudge, or shove, depending on your perspective, toward conversion. Talk about taxation with a side of persuasion. The cultural upheaval was equally profound. Zoroastrian fire temples, once the beating heart of Persian spiritual life, were either converted into mosques or left to crumble. The Magi, who had wielded power with the finesse of a seasoned spin doctor, found themselves increasingly marginalized. It's like getting demoted from rock star status to a backup singer in a garage band. Yet the community held firm, adapting their practices and finding ways to survive under the new regime. But if you think this was the end of Zoroastrianism, think again. Here's where the myth-busting begins. Contrary to popular belief, Zoroastrianism didn't just vanish into the ether. Instead, its followers, known as Parsis, embarked on a journey that would make any underdog story worth its salt. They sought refuge in India, where they could practice their faith without the looming shadow of the jizya. Landing on the western coast of India, the Parsis struck a deal with the local king. They promised not to convert anyone, and in return, they got to practice their religion freely. Imagine negotiating your way into a new country with nothing but your beliefs and a promise of non-interference. The Parsi community in India became a testament to resilience and adaptation. They thrived, contributing to the economic and cultural landscape of their new home. By the 19th century, Parsis were a driving force in India's burgeoning industries, from textiles to shipbuilding. They were like the Silicon Valley entrepreneurs of their time, with names like Tara and Godrej becoming synonymous with innovation and success. But back to the myth of extinction. While Zoroastrianism was certainly overshadowed by Islam, it wasn't extinct. In fact, it was quietly influencing the very religion that had supplanted it. The concept of a singular God, a final judgment, and an eternal struggle between good and evil. All of these themes found their way into Islamic theology, like Easter eggs in a blockbuster movie. Zoroastrianism might have been down, but it was far from out. The legacy of Zoroastrianism in Persia was also preserved through literature and cultural practices. The Shahnameh, an epic poem written by Ferdowsi in the 10th century, is a grand ode to Persian history and the Zoroastrian past. This was more than just nostalgia. It was a cultural lifeline, a way of keeping the embers of an ancient faith glowing in a new world order. Yet, survival wasn't just about clinging to the past. The Parsis in India exemplified adaptation, integrating into Indian society while retaining their unique identity. They became known for their philanthropy, funding schools, hospitals, and cultural institutions. This wasn't just about preserving a legacy. It was about actively contributing to the world around them. Imagine being part of a community that not only survived, but thrived by building bridges between cultures while holding onto the core tenets of their ancient faith. As we wrap up this part of the journey, it's clear that the story of Zoroastrianism is one of resilience against the odds. The faith might have been pushed to the margins, but it never truly disappeared. Instead, it found new ways to express itself, adapting to the changing tides of history while influencing the very cultures that sought to overshadow it. The next time you hear about Zoroastrianism's supposed extinction, remember this. Like a resilient phoenix, it rose from the ashes time and again, leaving an indelible mark on the world. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating tapestry, exploring how Zoroastrianism's legacy continues to echo through the corridors of history. As we continue to unravel the threads of this fascinating tapestry, let's bring the story of Zoroastrianism into the present day. Now, if you were expecting this ancient faith to be tucked away in some history book gathering dust, think again. Despite its modest numbers, only about 125,000 Zoroastrians, or Zoro's faithful, scattered across the globe. This community is anything but invisible. Spread across India, Iran, and a smattering of diaspora communities in North America, Europe, and Australia, they might be small, but their cultural footprint is as vibrant as ever. First, let's talk about the Parsis of India, who are arguably the most visible torchbearers of Zoroastrian traditions today. With about 60,000 members primarily in Mumbai, they've managed to punch well above their weight in terms of societal impact. Imagine a community that not only survived the tides of history, but thrived to become industrial and philanthropic powerhouses. The Tara family, for instance, is a name synonymous with industry in India, and they're not just playing Monopoly with real money. They're also deeply rooted in their Parsi heritage. From steel to software, the Taras have been instrumental in shaping modern India's economic landscape. It's like watching history's underdogs rise to become the MVPs of the present. But it's not just about business acumen. The Parsis are also cultural custodians, preserving rituals that date back thousands of years while adapting to the modern world. Take the Navjot ceremony, a rite of passage for young Zoroastrians, where children are inducted into the faith. It's a bit like a spiritual coming-of-age party, complete with sacred garments and recitations from the Avesta, the religion's holy book. Yet, despite the ancient origins, there's a distinctly contemporary twist, often followed by a celebration that rivals any modern-day bash, complete with feasting and dancing. Tradition meets today's party scene, and everyone's invited. Now, let's jet over to Iran, the ancestral heartland of Zoroastrianism, where around 15,000 Zoroastrians keep the flame alive, quite literally. Here, the community might be smaller, but their resolve is anything but. Despite being a religious minority in a predominantly Islamic nation, Iranian Zoroastrians have managed to hold onto their cultural and religious practices with a tenacity that would make even the most stubborn goat blush. The fire temple in Yazd, for example, houses a flame that has supposedly been burning continuously for over 500 years. It's like the ultimate eternal light bulb, defying the odds in a world where nothing seems to last. And then there's Nowruz, the Persian New Year, a festival that's transcended religious boundaries to become a cultural phenomenon celebrated by over 300 million people worldwide. Nowruz is all about renewal and resilience, a time to sweep away the cobwebs of the past year and embrace new beginnings. Picture families gathering to exchange gifts, feast on traditional dishes like sabzi polo mahi, herbed rice with fish, and jump over bonfires in a symbolic act of purification. It's like a cultural reset button, reminding us all that no matter how dire things might get, there's always a chance for a fresh start. But before we get too carried away with the fireworks and festivity, let's pause to acknowledge the quiet challenges that come with preserving such a rich heritage. One pressing issue is the dwindling numbers within the Zoroastrian community, a concern that looms like a dark cloud over the otherwise sunny celebrations. Intermarriage and conversion posing existential questions, the community faces a delicate balancing act between maintaining tradition and embracing change. It's a bit like walking a tightrope, with the stakes higher than ever. Yet, despite these challenges, Zoroastrianism continues to influence modern spirituality and ethics in ways that might surprise you. The religion's core tenets, good thoughts, good words, good deeds, are as relevant today as they were in Zoroaster's time. In a world that's often more grey than black and white, these principles offer a straightforward moral compass, a guiding light when things get murky. It's not about prescribing a one-size-fits-all answer, but rather encouraging individuals to engage with the world in a meaningful, ethical way. And let's not forget the environmental angle. Zoroastrianism has always emphasized the sanctity of nature, long before it was trendy to be green. The faith's respect for the natural world is woven into its rituals and teachings, advocating for a harmonious relationship with the earth. In an era where climate change headlines are as constant as the morning coffee, this ancient perspective feels refreshingly modern. So, as we wrap up this whirlwind tour through Zoroastrian history and its modern echoes, what's the takeaway? Well, if there's one thing this ancient faith teaches us, it's that resilience and adaptability are key. Whether you're a community of a few thousand or a massive global network, the ability to navigate change while staying true to core values is a lesson worth noting. Zoroastrianism might not be the largest religion on the block, but its impact is undeniably profound, proving that sometimes the smallest voices carry the most enduring messages. As we conclude, remember this: the story of Zoroastrianism is far from over. It's a living testament to the power of belief, community, and the timeless dance between tradition and modernity. In the grand tapestry of human history, where the ancient world often seems like a murky blend of myth and reality, the Mayans stand out like a well-lit billboard on a deserted highway. Known for their sophisticated architecture, advanced mathematics, and a calendar system that could make a Swiss watch look like a sundial, the Mayans were obsessed with time. Not just any time, cosmic time, the kind that links the earthly to the celestial. And it all kicks off with the long count calendar, a system so precise it's like the Mayans were looking at the universe through a pair of ancient high-def glasses. Let's start with the basics. The long count calendar, the Mayan brainchild, officially got the ball rolling on August 11, 3114 BCE. That's right, we're talking over 5,000 years ago. While the rest of the world was busy figuring out how to not trip over their own feet, the Mayans were crafting a calendar that would eventually outlast their civilization. The long count is the Mayan version of a cosmic time capsule, a system designed to track longer periods, unlike the Gregorian calendar that has us fumbling through leap years every 4 years like a drunken guest at a wedding. Now, you might be wondering, why were the Mayans so fixated on time? Well, they believed everything happened in cycles. To them, history wasn't a linear path, but a series of repeating patterns, like a cosmic playlist on repeat. The long count calendar was the Mayan attempt to keep track of these cycles, to predict the future by deciphering the past. In other words, they were the original data analysts, but instead of spreadsheets, they had pyramids and stelae. The brilliance of the long count lies in its structure. It's a base 20, vigesimal, and base 18 counting system, a numerical gymnastics routine that would leave most modern-day mathematicians scratching their heads. The calendar is divided into units like K'ins days, Winels 20 days, Tons 360 days, K'Atons 200 days, and B'Actons 144,000 days. Basically, it's like a Russian nesting doll of time units, each fitting snugly into the next. This intricate system allowed the Mayans to record dates thousands of years into the past and future, making our modern calendar look like a hastily scribbled grocery list in comparison. And here's the kicker. Despite their lack of paper, the Mayans managed to document all of this on stone carvings and codices. Imagine trying to fit your entire calendar app into a slab of limestone. Yet, they did it with such precision that, when 2012 rolled around, people genuinely thought the world might end because the Mayan calendar said so. Spoiler alert, it didn't. But let's not kid ourselves. The Mayans didn't have it all figured out. They weren't just sitting around with stone tablets, sipping cocoa while waiting for the next solar eclipse. Their society was riddled with the usual human foibles, power struggles, wars, and the occasional sacrifice to keep the gods happy. Yet, their calendar system was a triumph of human ingenuity, a testament to their mathematical prowess and their spiritual quest to understand the cosmos. In today's world, where calendar apps send us relentless reminders about everything from dentist appointments to yoga classes, the Mayan approach seems refreshingly grandiose. They weren't just planning for the weekend. They were plotting the rise and fall of empires, the birth of kings, and the return of gods. It was less about remembering Aunt Linda's birthday and more about aligning with the universe's rhythm. So next time you grumble about adjusting your clocks for daylight saving time, spare a thought for the Mayans. They managed to create a system that not only kept track of time with astounding accuracy, but also connected it to the very fabric of existence. In a world where time often feels like a runaway train, the Mayans were the conductors, orchestrating a symphony of celestial cycles with nothing but stone tools and a relentless curiosity about what lay beyond the stars. And speaking of cosmic rhythms, let's dive into the harmonious duo of the Tzolk'in and Harb calendars, the Mayan answer to a daily planner and a yearly calendar. Imagine trying to coordinate your life's events without Google Calendar at your fingertips. The Mayans didn't just imagine it, they nailed it. These two calendars were like a cosmic double act, each playing its part in the grand performance of Mayan life. First up, the Tzolk'in calendar, which boasted a unique 260-day cycle. This wasn't your average Monday to Sunday affair. Instead, it combined 20 named days with 13 numbered days, creating a cycle that repeated every 260 days. Now, why 260? Some scholars suggest it might have been tied to the human gestation period, which, frankly, makes our 9-month wait for a baby seem almost magical. But before you start picturing Mayan midwives using stone tablets as prenatal guides, let's be clear. The Tzolk'in wasn't just about marking time. It was about weaving the spiritual and the mundane into one seamless fabric. It guided everything from crop planting to religious ceremonies. This was the calendar that told you when to sow your maize and when to appease the gods with a little bloodletting. It was less about planning Taco Tuesday and more about ensuring the sun rose the next day. Then we have the Harb calendar, the Mayan version of the 365-day year we all know and love, or loathe, depending on your feelings about tax day. The Harb was divided into 18 months of 20 days each, plus a 5-day period known as the Wayeb. These 5 days were the Mayan equivalent of those weird days between Christmas and New Year when nobody knows what to do with themselves. Considered unlucky, the Wayeb was a time when the boundaries between the mortal and the divine blurred, and the gods might just decide to meddle in human affairs. If you thought Mercury in retrograde was bad, try dealing with divine intervention. Together, the Tzolk'in and Harb calendars formed a 52-year cycle known as the calendar round. This was the Mayans' way of syncing their cosmic clocks, ensuring that every 52 years, both calendars hit the reset button like a celestial refresh. Picture it as the ultimate cosmic double-check, ensuring that the universe was still in balance and your crops weren't going to fail because you'd forgotten to celebrate the right festival. And let's not forget the practicalities. The Mayans didn't have apps to remind them of important dates, but they had something better. an intricate system of glyphs and symbols that were recorded on everything from ceramics to codices. These visuals served as the ancient equivalent of sticky notes, ensuring that no one missed a crucial ritual or the all-important harvest season. Sure, the whole system might sound a little intense for modern sensibilities, but it worked. The Mayans weren't just timekeepers, they were time masters, aligning their lives with the cosmos in a way that makes our frantic scrambling for lost time seem almost quaint. They had no need for daylight-saving time adjustments. The universe was their clock, and they knew how to read it with an accuracy that still astounds us today. So, next time you're fumbling around for your smartphone to check the date, remember the Mayans. They managed to keep their complex societies ticking along without the need for digital prompts or electric light. Their calendars weren't just tools. They were the heartbeat of a civilization that understood time as a sacred and cyclical force, deeply intertwined with the mysteries of life and death. And while we're busy struggling with time zones and leap years, maybe there's a lesson to be learned from the Mayans. Perhaps it's about finding our own rhythm amidst the chaos, or recognizing the cycles in our lives and embracing them. Or maybe it's just about appreciating that, sometimes, the simplest systems are the most profound. But before we get too philosophical, let's not forget the Mayans were human too. They had their share of squabbles, power struggles, and the occasional human sacrifice to keep things lively. Yet, through it all, they maintained a sense of cosmic order that remains a testament to their ingenuity and their ability to see beyond the horizon, into the vastness of time itself. As we continue our journey into the world of Mayan calendars and their remarkable civilization, let's keep in mind that while we might occasionally lose track of time, the Mayans never did. They were the original Time Lords, masters of the cosmic dance, and their legacy is one of precision, spirituality, and an unyielding quest to understand their place in the universe. Stay tuned, because the Mayans have plenty more secrets to reveal, and we're just getting started. And speaking of the Mayans' cosmic dance, let's swivel our gaze skyward and chat about their astronomy skills, which were so sharp they could have given Galileo a run for his money, without so much as a telescope. Yes, these ancient astronomers were the original sky watchers, turning their eyes to the heavens and seeing patterns where others saw only specks of light. First, let's get one thing straight. The Mayans weren't just doodling stars in the sand for fun. Their astronomical prowess was both precise and pragmatic, an ancient GPS guiding everything from agriculture to warfare. Think of it as celestial strategy, with the heavens as the ultimate command center. They built observatories, like the one at Chichen Itza, not just as monuments to the gods, but as high-tech tools for tracking celestial movements. With structures aligned to astronomical events, these were the ancient world's equivalent of mission control, minus the computers and caffeine. Now, you might wonder how they achieved such accuracy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't magic. It was meticulous observation and a thirst for knowledge. The Mayans tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with the kind of attention to detail that would put modern bureaucrats to shame. They didn't need telescopes. They had time, patience, and a knack for pattern recognition. And let's be honest, in a world without Netflix distractions, they could afford to spend a few extra hours watching the stars. Venus, in particular, was the Mayans' celestial darling. This planet wasn't just another twinkling dart. It was a cosmic influencer, dictating everything from political maneuvers to fashion choices. Venus cycles were woven into the fabric of Mayan timekeeping with such precision that they could predict its movements for centuries. The planet's 584-day cycle was closely tracked, and its appearances and disappearances were seen as omens of great significance. In Mayan society, timing a war or coronation with the right phase of Venus could mean the difference between victory and disaster. And let's talk about those fashion trends. While it might sound outlandish, the Mayans took their cues from the cosmos when it came to style. Donning a feathered headdress wasn't just about looking snazzy. It was a statement of cosmic alignment, a reflection of the wearer's connection to the heavenly order. Imagine getting dressed in the morning based on the alignment of Venus. It gives a whole new meaning to dressed to the nines. But here's the kicker. This celestial obsession wasn't just about keeping time or looking good. It was about control. By aligning earthly events with celestial phenomena, Mayan rulers could legitimize their power. After all, who would question a king whose rise was foretold by the stars? It was a cosmic PR campaign, a blend of science, religion, and a dash of showmanship, all aimed at maintaining social order. Of course, it wasn't all divine insight and cosmic harmony. The Mayans also faced their fair share of challenges. While they were busy charting the stars, they were also navigating the messy business of human politics. Wars, alliances, and power struggles were as much a part of their world as their celestial calculations. If Venus was the star of the show, then the rulers were the directors, using its appearances to script the drama of their reigns. And let's not romanticize it too much. While their astronomical achievements were undeniably impressive, they were also a means of control. The priests and rulers who understood the celestial cycles held the keys to the kingdom, quite literally. Knowledge was power, and in a world where the gods were thought to dwell among the stars, understanding their movements was akin to speaking their language. So, the next time you glance up at the night sky, spare a thought for the Mayans, who saw not just stars, but a complex web of influence and order. Their ability to read this cosmic map was a testament to their ingenuity and dedication, a reminder that even in the ancient world, knowledge was the ultimate power. And as we continue to unravel the mysteries of Mayan astronomical prowess, remember that while they may have looked to the heavens for guidance, their feet were firmly planted on the ground, navigating a world as complex and challenging as our own. Stay tuned, because the Mayans still have more secrets to reveal, and we're just getting started. Yet, as we marvel at the Mayans' celestial calculations, let's fast forward to a more recent cosmic comedy of errors, the infamous 2012 apocalypse phenomenon. Ah yes, December 21, 2012, the day the world collectively lost its marbles over an ancient calendar, with doomsday enthusiasts huddling in basements and survivalists stockpiling canned beans like an overzealous Boy Scout troop. But while people were busy drafting their bucket lists, the Mayans were probably laughing from the great beyond, bemused by modern humanity's knack for misunderstanding ancient texts. To get to the heart of this debacle, we need to untangle the intricacies of the Mayan long count calendar and its Bacton cycle. Imagine, if you will, a celestial odometer. Each Bacton, a hefty span of 144,000 days, was like a mileage milestone on the Mayan cosmic road trip. December 21, 2012, marked the end of the 13th Bacton since the calendar's inception back in 3114 BCE. But instead of heralding the apocalypse, it was simply a time for a good old calendar reset, like flipping the page on a cosmic calendar, not the script of a disaster movie. The whole 2012 hysteria was akin to confusing your laptop's clock, reset with the end of technology as we know it. The Mayans were all about cycles, remember. They saw time as a series of ongoing loops, not a straight line hurtling toward oblivion. The idea that this calendar reset would spell doom was as ludicrous as thinking a new calendar year means the world starts from scratch. Sure, fresh start can feel like a mini-revolution, but it's hardly cause for existential dread. So how did an ancient calendar system become a global media frenzy? For that, we can thank a delightful cocktail of misinterpretation, pop culture, and a sprinkle of pseudoscience. The notion of an apocalypse was tantalizingly dramatic, and it caught on faster than a viral cat video. Hollywood, with its penchant for turning molehills into mountains, leapt on the bandwagon, delivering blockbusters that had audiences believing they'd need to start building arcs or, at the very least, acquire a sturdy helmet. But the real scandal here is not what the Mayans said, but how we chose to hear it. A civilization that peaked over a millennium ago inadvertently sparked a modern media circus, all because we humans love a good scare story. It's a testament to our fascination with endings. Whether it's the end of the world or the last season of a beloved TV show, we can't help but be drawn to the drama of finality. Yet, beneath the hype lies an irony as rich as a Mayan chocolate drink. Here's a civilization that vanished into the jungle centuries ago, and yet it managed to captivate the global imagination in the 21st century. The Mayans, with their profound understanding of time, must have chuckled at the notion that their intricate calculations could be mistaken for an ancient warning bell. They'd likely view our apocalyptic angst as a misunderstanding akin to mistaking a sophisticated piece of music for the noise of a broken record. Of course, this isn't to say the Mayans didn't have their own apocalyptic visions. They certainly did, but but they were more philosophical than Hollywood-style cataclysms. For them, the end of a cycle meant transformation, renewal, the dawn of a new era rather than the curtains closing on existence. It was a chance to reflect, recalibrate, and reboot. A cosmic control plus alt plus delete, if you will. So what should we take away from this episode, aside from a healthy skepticism of doomsday predictions? Perhaps it's a reminder of the power of narrative and how easily history can be reshaped by the stories we choose to tell. In an age where misinformation spreads faster than a sneeze in flu season, the 2012 phenomenon serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of misinterpreting the past. And while the world didn't end in a fiery blaze that December, the Mayans certainly left their mark, reminding us of the layers of complexity in their culture that go beyond the simple notions of doom and gloom. Their legacy is one of sophisticated timekeeping, a deep spiritual connection with the universe, and let's be honest, a knack for keeping us on our toes. As we continue to explore the world the Mayans left behind, let's do justice to their intellectual legacy by approaching history not just with curiosity, but with care, ensuring that the stories we tell are as rich and nuanced as the cultures we study. Stay tuned, because the Mayans have more secrets to unravel, and our journey through their fascinating world is far from over. As we step back from the brink of apocalypse hysteria and take a sober look at the Mayan legacy, it's like peering through the keyhole of an ancient door that opens onto a world of mathematical marvel and cultural richness. The Mayan calendar system, an astounding feat of arithmetic and astronomy, is more than just a dusty relic of the past. It's a bridge between ancient wisdom and modern understanding, a testament to a civilization that could teach us a thing or two about keeping time without the benefit of battery life. First, let's talk numbers, because the Mayans weren't just about pyramids and feathered headdresses. They were numbers nerds of the highest order. The long count calendar, with its base 20 system, was an accountant's fever dream, capable of tracking dates across millennia with pinpoint precision. While today's accountants might cringe at the thought of doing tax returns with a chisel and stone, the Mayans embraced this challenge with a gusto that makes modern calculators weep with envy. Their system was so precise that even our leap-year-loving Gregorian calendar seems like a clumsy attempt at timekeeping by comparison. But what makes the Mayan calendar truly remarkable isn't just its technical prowess. It's the cultural depth that underpins it. In the Mayan worldview, time wasn't a straight line but a circle, a continuum where past, present, and future were interconnected like an eternal cosmic conga line. This cyclical understanding of time is a philosophical goldmine, offering insights into the Mayans' spiritual beliefs and their quest to harmonize human life with the cosmos. In a society where the divine was as close as the stars, the calendar wasn't just a tool. It was a sacred map, charting the dance of gods and humans alike. Now, you might wonder how this ancient system influences us today. After all, we're not exactly chiseling dates into stone tablets anymore, unless you count social media posts as the digital equivalent. But the echo of the Mayan calendar can still be felt in the way we approach time. Take the concept of cycles, for instance. Whether it's economic cycles, fashion cycles, or even the cyclical nature of trends on TikTok, the idea that history repeats itself is as relevant today as it was in ancient Mayan society. It's a reminder that, despite our technological advances, we're not so far removed from our ancestors in our attempts to find order in the chaos of time. The Mayan calendar also prompts us to reconsider our relationship with the universe. In a world obsessed with progress and linear timelines, the Mayans offer a different perspective, one that values rhythm and recurrence over relentless forward motion. This perspective can be a soothing balm in our frenetic, fast-paced lives, encouraging us to pause and appreciate the cyclical beauty of nature, from the changing seasons to the ebb and flow of the tides. Perhaps it's time we borrowed a page from the Mayan playbook, taking a moment to align our own lives with the natural cycles that govern us all. And let's not forget the sheer artistry of the Mayan calendar. It's a reminder that mathematics isn't just a series of numbers. It's a form of art, a language that can express the grandeur of the cosmos in symbols and glyphs. The Mayans didn't just count days. They wove them into a tapestry of stories, each date a thread in the rich fabric of their culture. It's a testament to their ability to blend science and art into a seamless whole, a skill that remains as elusive as it is inspiring. In wrapping up our journey through the world of the Mayan calendar, we're left with a legacy that transcends time. The Mayans weren't just timekeepers. They were time architects, building a structure of understanding that still resonates today. Their calendars didn't just measure time. They celebrated it, turning the mundane act of counting days into a sacred ritual. And in a world where time often feels like a scarce commodity, the Mayans remind us that it's not just about the seconds ticking away, but about the moments we create within them. So the next time you glance at your watch or check your smartphone for the time, spare a thought for the Mayans. Their legacy isn't just etched in stone. It's carved into the very way we think about time and our place in the universe. They were the original Time Lords, masters of a cosmic dance that continues to inspire and intrigue us to this day. And there you have it, the Mayan calendar, an ancient marvel that continues to captivate our imaginations, challenging us to look beyond the surface and embrace the profound wisdom of a civilization long gone but never forgotten. With their unique blend of science, art, and spirituality, the Mayans offer us more than just a calendar. They offer a timeless lesson in the art of living, a reminder that while the hands of time may never stop, our understanding of it is what truly counts. You wake up to the sound of silence, so profound it feels like your ears are ringing. Welcome to the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where the hustle and bustle of modern life is a distant memory. The year is 1986, perpetually. Here, time stands still, and so does much of the infrastructure. The morning light filters through the cracked windows of your abandoned apartment in Pripyat, casting long shadows over the peeling wallpaper. This city, once a thriving Soviet utopia with a population of nearly 50,000, is now an eerie ghost town, a monument to human hubris. As you rub the sleep from your eyes, you might wonder how long it's been since the disaster. Over 30 years have passed since Reactor No. 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant decided to make an unplanned exit from the world of functional machinery. April 26, 1986, was the day when the word Chernobyl became synonymous with nuclear catastrophe. The explosion released about 400 times more radioactive material than the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Quite the overachiever in the world of nuclear mishaps, wouldn't you say? Today, your morning routine doesn't include scrolling through social media or brewing a fresh cup of coffee. Instead, you navigate the derelict streets of Pripyat, where nature is staging a wild comeback tour. Trees have sprouted through the concrete, and animals roam freely, blissfully unaware of the invisible danger that lingers. Here, the only traffic jams involve herds of wild boars and the occasional moose, reclaiming their territory like a boss. The silence is occasionally broken by the chirping of birds, a surprising serenade in this radioactive realm. Ornithologists have found that birds in the zone have adapted, with some species showing increased levels of antioxidants in their blood to combat the radiation. It seems evolution is not just for the fittest, but also for the most adaptable. Who knew nature had such a flair for the dramatic? As you make your way through the quiet streets, you might pass the iconic Ferris wheel in Pripyat's amusement park. It was supposed to open on May 1, 1986, for the May Day celebrations, but the disaster ensured it never saw a single joyful rider. Now, it stands as a rusting symbol of interrupted happiness, its yellow gondolas swaying gently in the breeze, like a melancholy giant frozen in time. You might think of the people who lived here, who enjoyed a lifestyle that at the time was the envy of much of the Soviet Union. The residents had access to state-of-the-art amenities, including schools, hospitals, and cultural centers. It was a model city, designed to showcase the best of Soviet life. But this morning, as the sun rises over the desolate landscape, all that remains are memories and radioactive decay. Speaking of radiation, you're not alone here. Scientists and tourists alike visit the exclusion zone, drawn by a mix of morbid curiosity and academic interest. They come equipped with Geiger counters, the modern-day equivalent of a canary in a coal mine, clicking away as they measure the ambient levels of cesium-137 and strontium-90. The readings can vary wildly, depending on where you stand. Some areas are relatively safe, while others are still hot enough to make a Geiger counter sing like a heavy metal band on tour. While you won't find a bustling cafe or a corner store in Pripyat, the zone is not completely devoid of human presence. A small number of Samosli, or self-settlers, have returned to live in the zone illegally. These hardy individuals, most of them elderly, have chosen to defy the evacuation orders and live out their days on their ancestral land. They farm their gardens, keep chickens, and live life on their own terms, radiation be damned. It's a testament to the stubborn resilience of the human spirit. As you continue your morning walk, you might reflect on the lessons learned, or not learned, from the Chernobyl disaster. It was a wake-up call for the world, highlighting the dangers of nuclear power and the catastrophic potential of human error. Yet, the allure of nuclear energy persists, with over 400 nuclear reactors operating worldwide as of 2023. Countries still grapple with the balance between the promise of clean energy and the specter of disaster. It's a complex equation with no easy answers, much like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while blindfolded. The zone also serves as a stark reminder of the Soviet Union's twilight years. The disaster exposed systemic issues within the USSR, including poor safety standards, bureaucratic incompetence, and a culture of secrecy. The Soviet response was initially one of denial, followed by a sluggish admission of the truth. It was this mishandling that contributed to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Chernobyl was not just a nuclear disaster, but a political one as well, a catalyst for change in a crumbling empire. As the morning unfolds, you ponder these weighty matters, all while surrounded by the quiet beauty of a landscape both haunted and haunting. The Chernobyl exclusion zone is a place where history feels alive, even as it stands in stark contrast to the bustling world outside its borders. Here, you are reminded of the fragility of human ambition and the enduring power of nature. It's a sobering thought, but as you navigate the silent streets, you realize it's also strangely comforting. After all, in the grand scheme of things, we're all just temporary residents on this planet, doing our best to leave behind something worth remembering. But hey, let's not get too existential just yet. There's a whole day ahead in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, and we've got more to uncover about the peculiar life that persists here. As the sun climbs higher, so do the stakes for those who live around this radioactive Rubik's Cube. You see, while most of the world has moved on from Chernobyl, a few enterprising souls have taken a page out of the When Life Gives You Lemons playbook. Except these lemons glow in the dark and come with a hefty dose of cesium-137. First, let's talk about the economy, because even in a place where the currency might as well be Geiger counterclicks, people find a way to trade. Imagine a bustling underground market where the goods are not your typical black market fare, but include relics of a bygone era. Old Soviet memorabilia, once discarded as junk, now fetches a pretty penny. From gas masks to military medals, these artifacts have become the zone's hardest exports. It's capitalism like you've never seen, where nostalgia and radioactivity combine to create a bizarre marketplace. Now, about those Chernobyl tours you've heard about. The internet might tell you they're the latest in extreme tourism, but let's get real for a moment. These aren't your average guided strolls through history. We're talking about organized tours that, despite their morbid allure, come with their own set of myths and realities. Sure, you can get a glimpse of Pripyat's iconic Ferris wheel or peer into the reactor sarcophagus, but don't expect to retrace the steps of the brave liquidators who risked life and limb to contain the disaster. These tours are heavily regulated, with strict paths and even stricter time limits. Staying too long could mean more than just an extra charge on your credit card. It could mean exceeding your annual radiation dose. And let's not forget the real cost of these operations. The guides, often locals who have found a way to make a living in the shadow of the sarcophagus, aren't just spouting facts for your amusement. They're part of a delicate dance between curiosity and caution, where the stakes are measured not just in rubles, but in microsieverts per hour. It's a sector that thrives on the allure of danger, yet remains tethered to the harsh reality of what happened here. Speaking of economic survival, the Samosli, those who return to live within the zone, are a testament to human tenacity. They've carved out a life in the unlikeliest of places, tending to gardens that sprout more than just vegetables. Yes, some of those sunflowers are as radioactive as the plot of a 1950s sci-fi movie. But it's not just about subsistence. These folks have created a microeconomy, trading produce and homemade goods with each other, occasionally bartering with the tour operators for essentials. It's a communal system where the currency is trust and resilience, not cash or credit. Now, let's debunk a myth or two while we're at it. Despite what some Instagram influencers might have you believe, the Chernobyl exclusion zone isn't just some post-apocalyptic playground for thrill-seekers. It's a living, breathing reminder of the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's unyielding force. The beauty of this place is not in its abandonment, but in its resilience. The zone's appeal is not just the eerie silence or the decaying structures. It's the stories of those who refuse to leave, who find a way to adapt and even thrive in conditions most of us can't imagine. As the day goes on, you might encounter some of these inhabitants, perhaps an elderly woman tending to her chickens, unfazed by the Geiger counter's incessant beeping. She might offer you a cup of homemade kvass, a reminder that hospitality knows no borders, even when those borders are defined by radiation levels. It's a humbling experience, one that makes you ponder the real cost of survival in a place where the past is never too far behind. And while we're on the subject of costs, it's worth noting that the upkeep of the Chernobyl site is no small feat. The new safe confinement, that massive steel structure designed to encase Reactor No. 4, wasn't just a feat of engineering, but also a financial behemoth, costing over $2 billion to complete. It's a price tag that underscores the ongoing challenge of managing a disaster that refuses to be neatly contained. As you navigate this world of contradictions, you start to see the exclusion zone not just as a relic of the past, but as a complex ecosystem of human ingenuity and folly. It's a place where the line between myth and reality is as blurred as the boundary between the safe zones and the hot spots. Here, survival isn't just about dodging radiation, but about finding meaning and purpose in the shadow of catastrophe. So, as the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the crumbling buildings of Pripyat, you find yourself caught between contemplation and curiosity. What does the future hold for this place? Will it remain a cautionary tale, or will it transform into something else entirely? The answers aren't clear, but one thing's for sure. The story of Chernobyl is far from over, and as the day progresses, so does our understanding of what it means to live in the exclusion zone. As the afternoon sun beats down on the crumbling edifices of Pripyat, we find ourselves knee-deep in the bureaucratic quagmire that was the Soviet government's response to the Chernobyl disaster. Spoiler alert. It wasn't exactly a masterclass in crisis management. If you've ever tried to assemble flat-pack furniture without instructions, you might get a sense of the chaos that ensued. The Soviet Union, in all its bureaucratic glory, decided to tackle this nuclear nightmare with a cocktail of secrecy, misinformation, and a healthy dose of denial. Imagine it's 1986, and the Soviet propaganda machine is revving up like a larder on a frosty morning. The official narrative spun faster than a centrifuge, painting Chernobyl as a minor hiccup in the grand Soviet story. To the world, they downplayed the disaster with the finesse of a magician distracting you with one hand while the other stuffs a rabbit into a hat. It took a full 18 days for Soviet authorities to admit to the world what had really happened, and by then, the radioactive cat was well and truly out of the bag. Now, let's talk about the liquidators, a term that sounds like it belongs in a 1980s action movie, but was the grim reality for around 600,000 people. These were the folks who risked their lives to clean up the mess, armed with little more than shovels, makeshift protective gear, and a dash of Soviet patriotism. They were the frontline soldiers in an invisible war against radiation, tasked with decontaminating the area, constructing the sarcophagus over Reactor No. 4, and generally trying not to glow in the dark. These liquidators were hailed as heroes, yet their heroism came with a hefty price tag. Many were conscripted into service, and the government's promises of compensation were often as vaporous as the radioactive clouds they battled. The official Soviet line was that these assignments were brief and safe, with exposure times limited to 90 seconds on the reactor roof, the infamous Death Bridge. However, the reality was far bleaker, with many liquidators suffering from radiation sickness, cancer, and other long-term health issues. It's like being promised a sunny vacation in the Maldives and ending up at a toxic waste dump. And let's not ignore the residents of the surrounding areas, who were caught in the crossfire of this atomic debacle. For those living in the exclusion zone, the government's response was a masterclass in bureaucratic absurdity. Initially, there was a delay in evacuating Pripyat, with residents blissfully unaware of the invisible danger seeping through their streets. When the order finally came, it was announced that the evacuation would be temporary. Just a few days away from home, they were told. Spoiler alert, those few days have stretched into decades. The Soviet Union's attempts to manage the information flow were as rigorous as a sieve holding water. While official reports claimed the situation was under control, the reality on the ground was anything but. Internationally, the USSR faced mounting pressure as radiation spread across Europe, leading to diplomatic tensions and criticism. Yet, domestically, the narrative was tightly controlled, with media outlets downplaying the disaster and emphasizing the government's swift response. It was a propaganda ballet, choreographed to keep the public calm and the truth at bay. But let's not pretend the Soviet government had the monopoly on questionable decisions. As the Chernobyl disaster unfolded, it laid bare the systemic issues within the USSR: poor safety standards, underinvestment in infrastructure, and a culture that prioritized secrecy over transparency. These faults were amplified by the sheer scale of the disaster, which required an unprecedented response. And while the Soviet Union eventually mobilized a massive workforce to address the crisis, the initial reaction was plagued by confusion, misinformation, and a lack of preparedness. In the midst of this chaos, the human stories of the liquidators and residents often got lost in the grand narrative. These were ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, dealing with the consequences of decisions made far above their pay grade. Their lived experiences contrasted sharply with the official Soviet line, revealing a disconnect between the government's portrayal of events and the harsh realities on the ground. It was a tale of two Chernobyls, one sanitized for public consumption, the other lived by those who bore the brunt of the disaster. As we dig deeper into the social and political dynamics post-Chernobyl, it's crucial to remember that this was a turning point for the Soviet Union. The disaster exposed the cracks in the Soviet system, highlighting the need for reform and transparency. It was a catalyst for change, contributing to the eventual dissolution of the USSR. And while the exclusion zone remains a testament to human folly, it also stands as a reminder of the resilience and courage of those who faced the disaster head-on. So here we are, wading through the thick underbrush of Soviet-era bureaucracy, with its layers of red tape and obfuscation. It's a convoluted tale that's as much about power and control as it is about nuclear physics. The lessons from Chernobyl are as relevant today as they were 37 years ago, serving as a stark warning of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the costs of concealing the truth. As we continue our journey through this radioactive relic of the past, let's keep our eyes peeled for the stories that illuminate the human spirit amidst the ruins of an empire. And with that, the afternoon stretches on, casting long shadows over a landscape where history refuses to fade quietly. We've got more ground to cover, more stories to unearth, and more myths to bust wide open. So, stay with me as we delve deeper into the layers of Chernobyl's enduring legacy, where the line between past and present is as blurred as the radiation levels in the air. As we continue our journey through this radioactive relic of the past, let's take a closer look at the evening glow settling over the Chernobyl exclusion zone. Spoiler alert, it's not the kind of glow you'd want to bask in, but in the fading light, there's a strange, otherworldly beauty to the decaying structures and the wild resurgence of nature. It's like stepping into a post-apocalyptic painting, one that combines the brushstrokes of history with the colors of resilience and renewal. First up, let's talk about those hauntingly beautiful buildings. Pripyat is like a freeze frame of Soviet ambition gone awry, a place where everything from apartment blocks to cultural centers stands frozen in time. But before you start romanticizing this urban decay, remember that these structures are more than just Instagram backdrops for intrepid explorers. They are monuments to a failed experiment, a testament to the hubris of a regime that believed it could control the uncontrollable. The schoolhouses, still filled with dusty textbooks and forgotten toys, whisper stories of lives interrupted. It's a chilling reminder that behind every crumbling wall, there's a human story that ended abruptly on April 26, 1986. Now, about that wildlife population that seems to be throwing a rager in the radioactive wilderness. Nature, it turns out, has quite the sense of humor. In the absence of human activity, the exclusion zone has become an accidental wildlife preserve. Boars, wolves, and even the elusive Piarz-Uolski's horse, thought to be extinct in the wild, are thriving here like it's a VIP section of Mother Nature's nightclub. And here's where we debunk a myth. These animals aren't mutating into two-headed beasts. Instead, they've adapted to the low-level radiation exposure in ways that are fascinating scientists worldwide. Take the wolves, for example. Research suggests their population density is up to 7 times higher than in neighboring reserves. It's like they got the memo that this is the place to be, and they're making the most of it. But let's not get too carried away with nature's comeback tour. Not everything is sunshine and daisies, or, in this case, sunshine and radioactive soil. Radiation levels in the zone still pose risks, and while some species have developed coping mechanisms, others have not been so lucky. Studies show that smaller animals, particularly those with shorter lifespans, are more susceptible to radiation effects. It's a stark reminder that while nature can adapt, it doesn't mean it's a walk in the radioactive park. So, what's the takeaway here? Well, it's a mixed bag. On one hand, the resurgence of wildlife highlights nature's incredible resilience. On the other, it underscores the long-term impact of human folly. It's like watching a nature documentary with a twist, one where the antagonist is invisible and the heroes are unexpectedly furry. Now, let's pivot to the human spirit, because while the natural world might be doing its best to reclaim the zone, humanity hasn't exactly thrown in the towel. The Samosli, or self-settlers, who return to the zone, are perhaps the most poignant example of this tenacity. These folks embody the spirit of resilience, choosing to live on land that most would consider uninhabitable. They're like the ultimate DIY survivalists, making do with what's available, growing their own food, and living life on their own terms. It's not just about stubbornness. It's about identity, roots, and a connection to the land that defies logic. And speaking of defying logic, let's touch on the myths surrounding radiation. We've all heard tales of glowing birds and mutant tomatoes, but the reality is far less cinematic. Radiation isn't an instant death sentence, nor does it turn you into a superhero or a supervillain, for that matter. The truth is, the effects of radiation are complex and depend on a multitude of factors, including exposure level and duration. It's not a one-size-fits-all scenario, and the long-term health effects on humans and animals are still being studied. So, while it's tempting to imagine the zone as a playground for the bizarre, the reality is a nuanced web of science and adaptation. As the evening draws near, the zone takes on a different character. The shadows lengthen, and the air cools, yet the stories that linger here are anything but cold. They are reminders of the fragility of human ambition and the enduring power of nature. It's a place where the past refuses to remain buried, where the echoes of history resonate loudly enough to drown out the silence. And in this twilight, as we reflect on the day's discoveries, we realize there's still so much more to uncover in this enigmatic corner of the world. So, what's next for the Chernobyl exclusion zone? Will it remain a cautionary tale, or will it evolve into a symbol of rebirth and resilience? The answers are as murky as the Pripyat River, winding through a landscape forever changed by human hands. But one thing's for sure. As the sun sets over this haunting tableau, the story of Chernobyl is far from over, and we're just getting started on unraveling its many layers. So, stick around as we continue to explore the intricate dance between nature and humanity in this most unlikely of places. There's more to see, more to question, and more to understand as we delve deeper into the heart of what makes the Chernobyl exclusion zone a place unlike any other on Earth. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting the Chernobyl exclusion zone in a twilight haze, we find ourselves contemplating the legacy of this monumental disaster. It's a place that continues to straddle the line between history and myth, reality and legend. So, let's dive into the cultural impact of Chernobyl, where nuclear catastrophe meets popular media and dark tourism. First, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say the radioactive elephant's foot. Chernobyl has become the poster child for nuclear disaster, and its story has been told and retold across various media. From documentaries like Chernobyl, The Lost Tapes, to the critically acclaimed HBO miniseries Chernobyl, the disaster has captured our collective imagination. But why? Well, it's a gripping tale of human error, political intrigue, and the terrifying power of the atom. Essentially, a real-life thriller that doesn't need embellishment. Yet with every retelling, there's a tendency to romanticize the narrative. Take the HBO series, for example, which, while masterfully crafted, took some creative liberties. It portrayed the disaster as a grim parable, complete with heroes and villains, but reality is rarely so black and white. The truth is, the Chernobyl disaster was a complex web of systemic failures, human mistakes, and bureaucratic bungling. It wasn't just one bad day at the plant. It was years of neglect and oversight wrapped up in a neat little package of nuclear doom. Now, let's talk about dark tourism. Yes, people actually pay good money to visit the exclusion zone. It's like Disneyland, but with fewer rides and more Geiger counters. The allure of Chernobyl as a tourist destination is undeniable. It offers a glimpse into a world frozen in time, where nature and decay coexist in eerie harmony. But let's not get carried away with the idea of this as a post-apocalyptic theme park. The reality is, Chernobyl is a site of tragedy, not a playground for thrill-seekers with a penchant for the macabre. In 2018 alone, over 70,000 tourists visited the exclusion zone, eager to snap selfies in front of the rusting Pripyat Ferris wheel. It's a trend that's as fascinating as it is unsettling. On one hand, it raises awareness about the disaster and its ongoing impact. On the other, it risks turning a place of immense suffering into a backdrop for social media likes. It's a fine line to walk, and one that requires a measure of respect and understanding. But let's not forget the economic implications of this tourism boom. The tours provide much-needed income for the local economy and create jobs in a region that was left reeling from the disaster. It's a delicate balance between exploiting tragedy and preserving history, and it's one that continues to evolve as the world grapples with Chernobyl's legacy. Speaking of legacy, let's pivot to the lessons learned, or not learned, from this disaster. Chernobyl was a wake-up call for the world, highlighting the potential dangers of nuclear power. Yet, as of 2023, there are still over 400 nuclear reactors humming away globally. Why? Because nuclear energy remains a tantalizing option in the quest for clean energy, despite its risks. The lesson here is that history has a funny way of repeating itself. We humans are a stubborn bunch, often unwilling to forego the promise of progress, even when the past warns us otherwise. And while we're on the subject of stubbornness, let's revisit the Samosli, the self-settlers who returned to the zone. Their stories are a testament to the human spirit, a reminder that even in the face of disaster, life finds a way. These individuals have forged a community in a place most would deem uninhabitable, and in doing so, they've challenged our perceptions of what it means to live in the shadow of catastrophe. Chernobyl's impact also extends into the realm of politics. The disaster exposed the Soviet Union's vulnerabilities, contributing to its eventual dissolution in 1991. It highlighted the dangers of a system that prioritized secrecy over safety, and in doing so, it became a catalyst for change. Fast forward to today, and we see echoes of Chernobyl in the world's response to other crises, from climate change to pandemics. It's a stark reminder that transparency and accountability are crucial in navigating the challenges of our modern world. As the evening deepens and the stars twinkle above the haunting landscape of the exclusion zone, we are left to reflect on the broader lessons of Chernobyl. It's a story of human ambition and folly, resilience and renewal, tragedy and hope. It serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked progress and the importance of learning from our mistakes. But it's also a testament to the enduring power of nature and the indomitable spirit of those who call this place home. So, what does the future hold for Chernobyl? Will it remain a symbol of nuclear disaster, or will it become something more, a reminder of the past that guides us toward a better future? The answers aren't clear, but one thing's for sure: Chernobyl's story is far from over. As we continue to explore its legacy, let's keep our eyes open and our minds curious, ready to learn from the past as we navigate the uncertain terrain of the future. And with that, our journey through this radioactive relic comes to a close. But as you drift off to sleep, remember that the lessons of Chernobyl are as relevant today as they were in 1986. They're a reminder that in the grand tapestry of history, we are all threads, weaving a story that is both uniquely ours and part of something much larger. So, sleep well, my friends, and dream of a world where we learn from our past to create a brighter, safer future. In the grand tapestry of history, the Shang Dynasty is like that indie band you've never heard of, but suddenly find everywhere once you do. It all kicks off around 1600 BCE, right smack in the glorious mess of the early Chinese Bronze Age. This was a time when bronze wasn't just for statues and Instagrammable art installations, but was the cutting-edge tech of its day. Think of it as the iPhone of ancient metallurgy, transforming societies faster than you can say tick-tock trend. Before the Shang strutted onto the scene, there was the Xia Dynasty, which historians argue about like sports fans debating the greatest of all time. Was the Xia real, or just a mythical placeholder for the Shang's predecessors? Archaeological digs suggest some substance to the Xia tales, but the Shang is where we start getting the real historical party going, thanks to some solid evidence unearthed from the ground. Speaking of evidence, let's talk about the Enyang site, the archaeological blockbuster that turned the Shang dynasty from myth into historical fact. Discovered in the early 20th century, Enyang is the ancient city that keeps on giving. It's like the Las Vegas of archaeological finds, with enough bronze artifacts to furnish a small museum. Not to mention, it was here that they found the oracle bones, which are basically ancient China's version of Twitter. Oracle bones are these fascinating relics, turtle shells and arc scapulae, because why not? Used by the Shang to divine the future. Picture this, a Shang king sitting in his palace, pondering the eternal questions of life, like whether the harvest will be good or if they should go to war. Instead of consulting a magic 8-ball, they'd carve questions into these bones, heat them until they cracked, and then interpret the patterns. It's like horoscopes on steroids, with a touch of pyrotechnics for flair. These bones aren't just a window into the Shang's mystical side, but also our earliest examples of Chinese writing. Imagine if your daily horoscope was etched in bone and then buried for millennia. Would it still predict you'd meet a tall, dark stranger? Or would it say, "Congrats, your bones are now a major historical artifact"? The discovery of these bones and the writing on them has been a game changer. It turns out, some ancient folks weren't just sitting around waiting for crops to grow. They were busy jotting down the who, what, when, and why of their lives. This writing wasn't just about future predictions, but recorded everything from royal decrees to economic transactions. It's like finding an ancient diary, only with fewer teenage angst entries and more about grain storage and military campaigns. Now, let's not get too romantic about the Shang. Sure, they had a knack for bronze and a flair for the mystical, but life back then was no picnic. The Shang society was hierarchical, with kings and nobles sitting pretty, while the majority labored away to keep the bronze wheels turning. It was a time when being a commoner meant you were more likely to end up making the king's next fancy dagger than wielding it. The political landscape of the Shang was as complex as a modern soap opera. Power struggles, alliances, betrayals, it's all there, minus the dramatic music and convenient commercial breaks. The Shang kings were not just rulers, but also high priests, blending politics and religion in a way that would make even the most ambitious modern politician blush. Economically, the Shang dynasty was all about resources, bronze being the big ticket item. They had to secure tin and copper, the essential ingredients for bronze, through trade or conquest. This need for resources often drove them to expand their territory, leading to conflicts with neighboring tribes. The Shang weren't just sitting around waiting for things to happen. We're out there making things happen, one bronze casting at a time. It's easy to get swept up in the romance of ancient dynasties, the grandeur, the mystique. But let's not forget, these were times when life expectancy hovered around 30, and dental care was as mythical as unicorns. The Shang dynasty, with its glinting bronze and enigmatic oracle bones, stands as a testament to human ingenuity and ambition, a flickering beacon in the hazy annals of early Chinese history. And so, armed with bronze and a penchant for divination, the Shang carved out a legacy that would echo through the ages. They may have started as a curious footnote in the grand narrative of history, but But thanks to some well-buried bones and a bit of archaeological luck, the Shang dynasty's rise from obscurity is a story that continues to captivate us today. Now, let's shift our gaze from the mystical allure of oracle bones to the gritty nuts and bolts that made the Shang dynasty tick: politics and economy. Picture the Shang political structure as an intricate web of power, where the kings, with their dual role as rulers and priests, were the spiders sitting comfortably at the center. The kings weren't just mere figureheads. They wielded significant clout, directing both the spiritual and temporal affairs of the kingdom. This political system was as much about divine mandate as it was about military might, kind of like if your local pastor also happened to be the head of the armed forces. Benevolent kings, you say? Well, that's the romanticized version. In reality, the Shang dynasty was fueled by a system that thrived on slave labor and exacting tribute. It's like they invented a very early version of the gig economy. But instead of Uber drivers, you had workers toiling away without the luxury of choosing their hours or getting tips. The economy was heavily reliant on agriculture, with millet and rice being the staple crops. Tribute from vassal states and conquered lands was a big deal, ensuring the Shang kings could continue their lavish lifestyles and fund their perpetual arms race in bronze weaponry. Now, let's take a detour to Zhengzhou, one of the Shang's primary capitals. Imagine a bustling urban center where political intrigue was as common as the morning market. Zhengzhou was fortified with massive walls, evidence of a society that wasn't taking any chances on the defense front. These walls were about 7 kilometers long, with a thickness that would make even the most ambitious home renovator raise an eyebrow. The city was a hub of activity, a place where artisans, traders, and soldiers mingled, each playing their part in the grand Shang symphony. On the technological front, the Shang were the ancient equivalent of an arms dealer's dream client. Their military technology was as impressive as it was terrifying, with bronze weaponry leading the charge. From spears and axes to chariots and armor, the Shang made sure their military was a force to be reckoned with. Now, here's a thought. With all that bronze, why not diversify a little? Maybe a nice bronze statue of a pet dog to liven up the palace courtyard. But no, practicality wasn't the order of the day. The Shang were too busy ensuring their enemies were kept at bay, because nothing says, "Don't mess with us," quite like a wall of shiny bronze spears. But let's not get carried away romanticizing the Shang's martial prowess. The reality was far grimmer. The production of these bronze weapons was backbreaking work, often carried out by forced laborers who certainly weren't getting any Employee of the Month awards. The demand for tin and copper, the essential ingredients for bronze, drove the Shang to expand their territories aggressively. It was a classic case of supply and demand, with a dash of ancient imperialism thrown in for good measure. Economically, the Shang's reliance on bronze wasn't just about keeping up appearances. It was about maintaining power. Holding a bronze weapon was akin to holding a golden ticket in the lottery of survival. It was a symbol of status, a tool of war, and a means of control. And while the kings enjoyed the fruits of tribute and conquest, it was the common folks who bore the brunt of the labor. Life for the average Shang citizen was a far cry from the opulent tales spun by later historians. It was more like a daily grind of farming, crafting, and occasionally helping out with the latest military campaign, not exactly the stuff of epic tales. The Shang's political and economic systems were intricately linked, with each reinforcing the other. The kings needed resources to maintain their power, and those resources were extracted through a combination of conquest and tribute. This created a cycle that kept the wheels of the Shang state turning, even as it ground down those at the bottom of the social hierarchy. It's a testament to human ambition, and the lengths people will go to secure their place at the top of the heap. Through this lens, the Shang dynasty emerges not just as a civilization of mystics and metalworkers, but as a complex society where power dynamics and economic imperatives shape the course of history. So, the next time you hear tales of wise and noble kings, remember the reality was often more about the bronze in their armories than the wisdom in their hearts. As romantic as the stories might be, the truth is often a bit more tarnished, much like an ancient bronze dagger found buried in the sands of time. Yet, the Shang dynasty wasn't just about shiny bronze and power plays. It was a cultural powerhouse that left a lasting impression on the world. Imagine your favorite band dropping a surprise album, except this one echoes through thousands of years. From art to religion, the Shang's legacy is as rich as their royal Kafas were from all that tribute. Let's start with art. The Shang were the original metalheads, and their bronze work wasn't just for weaponry. They crafted intricate ritual vessels, like the iconic Ding and Gu, which were the ancient equivalent of fine china, only much heavier, and with a penchant for dragons and mythical beasts. These vessels weren't just for show. They played a central role in religious ceremonies. The artistry was so advanced that even modern metallurgists scratched their heads, wondering how they pulled it off without the benefit of YouTube tutorials. Then there's jade, the Shang's other luxury item. Forget diamonds or gold. Jade was the real deal. The elite flaunted jade pendants and bracelets like they were going out of style, only they weren't, because jade never goes out of style in ancient China. The Shang believed jade had protective powers, a sort of spiritual SPF for the afterlife. This wasn't just bling for the living. It was meant to set you up nicely when you shuffled off this mortal coil. Now, as much as we love a good art story, let's wade into the murkier waters of Shang religion. Here's where things get a bit more, shall we say, intense. The Shang weren't just casual observers of the divine. They were deeply entrenched in a spiritual world that was as brutal as it was profound. Ancestor worship was at the heart of everything. The kings weren't just ruling over their subjects. They were also keeping their ancestors happy. Think of it as a family reunion where the guests of honor are your great-great-grandparents, and they're judging your every move. This ancestor worship wasn't just about lighting a few incense sticks. No, the Shang took it to another level with oracle bones and sacrifices. And here's where we debunk a myth or two. While the romanticized version of Shang religion paints a picture of noble kings communing with the heavens, the reality was a bit more gruesome. Human sacrifices were a thing, often prisoners of war or slaves, unfortunately. It was believed these offerings would curry favor with the ancestors, and by extension, the gods. It's a part of history that's hard to reconcile with our modern sensibilities, but it underscores the lengths to which the Shang went to secure divine approval. Speaking of sacrifices, let's talk about the Shang's version of a PR campaign. In today's world, spin doctors work tirelessly to make sure only the good stuff makes the headlines. The Shang had their own version of this, using rituals and sacrifices to project an image of divine right and power. It was a way to keep the populace in check and remind everyone who was in charge. Sure, it was more Game of Thrones than the West Wing, but the principle was the same. Control the narrative, control the people. Religion, art, and power were all interconnected in the Shang era, a trifecta that defined their culture. The king was seen as the bridge between heaven and earth, a role that required constant validation through ritualistic practices. It's almost like they were walking a tightrope, balancing between earthly duties and divine expectations. Now, let's not forget the technological strides the Shang made. They were like the Steve Jobs of ancient China, constantly innovating and pushing boundaries. Aside from their mastery in bronze, they also excelled in pottery. The Shang kilns were capable of reaching temperatures that allowed them to create durable, high-fired ceramics. These weren't just any parts. They were the Teflon of their time, used for everything from cooking to storage. And let's give a nod to their agricultural advances. The Shang implemented early forms of crop rotation and irrigation, ensuring their lands were as productive as they were defensible. This wasn't just about feeding the elite. It was about sustaining a burgeoning population and keeping the economy humming. After all, you can't wage war or perform grand rituals on an empty stomach. The Shang dynasty's cultural contributions were as multifaceted as they were enduring. From their art to their religious practices, they set a foundation that would influence Chinese culture for millennia. While it's tempting to romanticize their achievements, it's crucial to remember the human cost behind the grandeur. The Shang weren't just creating for art's sake. Their cultural output was deeply intertwined with their social and political fabric. In this grand tapestry of history, the Shang dynasty stands out not just for its accomplishments, but for its contradictions. They were visionaries and warriors, artists and conquerors, priests and kings. It's a legacy that continues to captivate historians and laypeople alike, testament to the complex interplay of culture and power in shaping a civilization. As we delve deeper into their story, it's clear the Shang left an indelible mark on history. one that's as compelling as it is complex, and one that invites us to look beyond the surface to the deeper truths beneath. And as we turn the page from the Shang's cultural heights, we find ourselves staring into the abyss of their decline. A narrative as twisted as a soap opera, minus the commercial breaks. The Shang dynasty, for all its bronze-clad glory and ritualistic splendor, was on a collision course with destiny. By around 1046 BCE, the wheels were starting to wobble, and the ride was about to get bumpy. Let's chat about the infamous King Zhu of Shang, often painted as the poster child for tyrannical excess. According to the legends, he makes Nero look like a model citizen. We're talking about a guy who supposedly built a lake of wine and a forest of meat. Now, before we get carried away imagining some ancient Netflix cooking special, let's pump the brakes. A lot of what we know about King Zhu comes from the Zhou dynasty, who took over after him. They had every incentive to paint this guy as a monster. It's the classical, blame the guy before you tactic. So, was King Zhu really an ancient rock star of hedonism, or just the victim of really bad press? It's hard to say. Maybe he didn't get a chance to explain his side. History's equivalent of a one-star Yelp review with no right to reply. What we do know is that internal strife and overextension were real issues that plagued his reign. The Shang had expanded their territories to the point where managing everything was like herding cats, only with more bronze and less flexibility. The socio-political landscape was no picnic either. The Shang court was rife with intrigue, imagine House of Cards, but with more oracle bones and fewer smartphones. Rival factions and power struggles were the order of the day. And while the Shang kings had traditionally held both spiritual and temporal power, by this time, those lines were becoming as blurry as a Monet painting in a fog. Enter the Zhou, a neighboring state tired of the Shang's antics, or at least that's the narrative they spun. They saw an opportunity, and like any savvy player in the Game of Thrones, they seized it. The Zhou, led by King Wu, rallied a coalition of disgruntled states and vassals in what could be called a masterclass in diplomacy and opportunism. The stage was set for the Battle of Mui, a clash that was less of an epic showdown and more of a grand-scale demonstration of the Shang's dwindling support. The Zhou forces, numbering around 50,000, faced off against the Shang's troops, who were supposed to be as numerous as 70,000. But here's the kicker. A chunk of those Shang soldiers were reportedly none too thrilled to be there. Picture this. Battle lines drawn, adrenaline pumping, and half the Shang army deciding they'd rather be anywhere else but on the losing side of history. It's like showing up to a potluck and realizing half the guests brought nothing but excuses. The Shang forces collapsed faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. King Zhu, facing the inevitable, reportedly holed up in his palace and set it on fire, taking his treasures with him in one last act of defiance or desperation, depending on your perspective. It's a story that borders on the tragic and the farcical, like a Shakespearean tragedy with a splash of Die Hard. Zhu, having won the day, didn't just stop at taking over. They went full on with their PR campaign, branding the Shang as morally bankrupt and themselves as the righteous new rulers. They even coined the term Mandate of Heaven to justify their rule, a sort of divine seal of approval that would echo through Chinese history. It's a brilliant piece of spin, turning a military coup into a divinely ordained regime change. But let's not get too starry-eyed about the Zhou. They were as politically savvy as they were opportunistic. By dismantling the Shang's centralized power structure, they set up a feudal system that relied heavily on loyalty and personal bonds, which, spoiler alert, would eventually lead to their own set of headaches. The fall of the Shang is a testament to the precarious nature of power. It's a reminder that no matter how shiny your bronze or how impressive your rituals, if you lose the support of your people or overextend your reach, you're setting yourself up for a fall. The Shang dynasty, for all its achievements, ultimately succumbed to the age-old pitfalls of internal dissent and external pressures. As we leave the smoldering ruins of the Shang behind, the stage is set for the Zhou to step into the limelight. But stay tuned, because the Zhou story isn't all sunshine and rainbows either. Their rise, like any great drama, is filled with twists, turns, and more than a few skeletons in the closet. So, keep your oracle bones handy and your jade at the ready. This history lesson is far from over. The Zhou dynasty, stepping out of the shadows like an understudy, finally getting its moment in the spotlight, wasted no time in painting itself as the righteous successor of the Shang. But before we hand the mic over to the Zhou, let's take a moment to appreciate the Shang's enduring legacy. A legacy that's like a stubborn stain on the fabric of history, refusing to fade away. First up, writing. The Shang didn't just dabble in a few scribbles. They laid the groundwork for what would become the world's oldest continuous writing system. Those oracle bones, with their cryptic cracks and ancient tweets, weren't just mystical musings. They were the Shang's way of keeping tabs on everything from grain harvests to royal decrees. Imagine if your grocery list was etched onto a turtle shell and became a museum exhibit 3,000 years later. The Shang's early scripts evolved into Chinese characters, connecting the dots through centuries, like a linguistic family tree with roots deep in the Bronze Age. The Shang also had a knack for governance that future dynasties would swipe like a well-thumbed recipe book. Their system wasn't just a top-down affair of kings barking orders. Nope, it was a sprawling hierarchy where local rulers played their part in a grand symphony of power, until they decided to hit a few sour notes. Of course, this model of governance, with its mix of central authority and local autonomy, would echo through Chinese history like a catchy tune stuck in your head. Now let's talk culture. The Shang were trendsetters, no doubt about it. Their art, with its intricate designs and mythical motifs, wasn't just eye candy. It was a visual language that spoke of power and spirituality. Those bronze vessels, with their dragon embellishments and elaborate patterns, were more than mere showpieces. They were symbols, blurring the lines between the earthly and the divine, a theme that would resonate through Chinese art and culture like a timeless refrain. But here's the kicker. History has a funny way of playing the same old song on repeat. The Shang's downfall, a cautionary tale of overreach and internal strife, is a story that future dynasties would find all too familiar. Power, like a game of musical chairs, has a way of shifting when the music stops, often leaving those at the top scrambling for a seat. The Zhou, for all their triumph and self-righteous rhetoric, would eventually discover that maintaining power is as precarious as balancing on a tightrope in a windstorm. Yet, the Shang's influence didn't just vanish into the historical ether. Modern-day archaeologists, like determined detectives piecing together a cold case, have unearthed the story of the Shang with each shovel of dirt. Sites like Anyang have become the archaeological equivalent of a blockbuster movie, drawing historians and tourists alike to marvel at the relics of a bygone era. It's like the Shang left behind a breadcrumb trail, leading us back to a time when bronze was king and bones whispered secrets of the future. And let's not forget pop culture's love affair with the Shang. From documentaries to dramatizations, the Shang dynasty continues to capture our imagination, testament to our fascination with the ancient world. Whether it's a scholarly book or a Netflix series, the Shang story is retold time and again, a narrative that straddles the line between history and myth, fact and fiction. So, what can we learn from the Shang dynasty, besides the obvious caveat of avoiding tyrannical excess and a penchant for questionable PR campaigns? Perhaps it's the reminder that innovation and creativity often come from unexpected places. The Shang, with their bronze ingenuity and mystical rituals, were pioneers in their own right, setting the stage for the cultural and technological advances that would shape China for millennia. In the grand theater of history, the Shang dynasty played its part with flair and drama, leaving an indelible mark on the world stage. Their legacy is a mosaic of triumphs and tragedies, innovations and excesses, a story that invites us to look beyond the myths and uncover the truths that lie beneath. As we close the chapter on the Shang and look forward to the tales of the Zhou and beyond, let's remember that history, much like human nature, is a beautifully complex tapestry, woven with threads of ambition, power, and the eternal quest for meaning. In the bustling heart of second-century Rome, where marble columns were as ubiquitous as Instagram filters are today, a young boy named Marcus Aurelius was learning the fine art of not being a child. Unlike his peers, who might have been chasing each other through the forum, Marcus was buried under a pile of scrolls, grappling with the weighty wisdom of Stoic philosophy. At just 11 years old, he was already having existential crises that would make a modern philosopher blush. No time for games when you're busy contemplating the nature of virtue, right? Born in 121 CE, Marcus was no ordinary Roman kid. He was a member of the senatorial class, which meant he was destined for greatness, or at least a life without the mundane chores of fetching water or worrying about what to wear each morning. This was a world where destiny was mapped out in advance, and Marcus's roadmap pointed him straight to the throne. But before he could even think about wearing the imperial purple, he had to survive the Roman equivalent of a grueling academic boot camp. His tutors didn't just teach him how to read and write. They molded him into a living embodiment of stoic resilience. Marcus was adopted by Emperor Antoninus Pius in 138 CE, a move that was less about family love and more about political chess. You see, when Emperor Hadrian decided to play matchmaker for the Roman Empire, he adopted Antoninus on the condition that Antoninus would adopt Marcus in turn. Talk about a convoluted adoption process, but at least it didn't require a home study. Antoninus, being a dutiful son, took young Marcus under his wing, ready to turn him from a toga-wearing boy into an emperor with gravitas. As Marcus grew, his life became a balancing act of philosophical pondering and imperial training. His education was no joke. He was schooled by some of the sharpest minds of the time, including Herodes Atticus, a man whose name alone sounds like an academic footnote. This wasn't your average schooling with quizzes and recess. It was a full-blown intellectual marathon. Marcus was drilled in literature, rhetoric, and philosophy, learning to wield words like a gladiator would a sword. He was being groomed for leadership, but also for wisdom, a rare combo even by today's standards. While other kids might have been dreaming of chariot races, Marcus was learning about the virtues of patience and temperance. It's like being a member of the world's most exclusive club, where the only entertainment is a discussion on the nature of the soul. But hey, at least he wasn't worrying about whether his sandals were in style. Despite the heavy academic load, Marcus did manage to find time to breathe, often indulging in the rather unique hobby of wrestling. Perhaps he found grappling with physical opponents a nice break from wrestling with philosophical dilemmas. But make no mistake, his life was anything but carefree. The empire was a constant presence in his life, a looming shadow reminding him of the responsibilities he would one day shoulder. By the time he was in his late teens, Marcus was already an accomplished thinker, ready to transition from student to statesman. In 145 C, he married Faustina the Younger, daughter of Antoninus, which was more of a strategic alliance than a romantic escapade. If you thought office politics were tough, try navigating the intricate web of Roman dynastic marriages. This union was a clear signal that Marcus was moving up the ranks, cementing his position as the heir apparent. Marcus's early life was a series of calculated moves, a game of imperial chess where every piece had its role. He wasn't just a boy in a toga. He was a young man slowly being wrapped in the purple threads of destiny. By the time Antoninus passed the imperial baton to him in 161 CE, Marcus was ready, or as ready as one can be to lead an empire that stretched from Britain to Egypt. The weight of Rome was now firmly on his shoulders, and the world was waiting to see if this philosopher emperor could live up to the hype. So, here we have the young Marcus Aurelius, a man who would go on to pen Meditations, a work that continues to inspire deep thoughts and Instagram quotes alike. But before he became a philosopher king, he was just a kid with a destiny, a toga, and a whole lot of philosophical baggage. In a world where emperors were often remembered for their conquests and debauchery, Marcus was preparing to be remembered for his mind, a rare feat in any era. But before he could really get into the thick of things, he had to navigate the tricky waters of imperial politics, familial expectations, and of course, the ever-present shadow of his philosophical tutors. Little did he know, the real challenges were just beginning. As Marcus Aurelius took on the mantle of emperor in 161 CE, he wasn't stepping into a serene empire ready to follow his philosophical musings. Rome was more like an ancient reality show, complete with political backstabbing, economic crises, and a co-star who preferred wine over wisdom. Enter Lucius Verus, Marcus's co-emperor, and an unlikely partner in this imperial buddy cop drama. If Marcus was the stoic philosopher, Lucius was the quintessential party animal. Think Plato meets Bacchus. Their co-emperorship was a first for Rome, a historical odd couple that could have been the subject of an HBO series if only the network existed back then. Now, let's address the elephant in the Colosseum. Why two emperors? You see, Marcus believed in the power of shared responsibility, a radical notion in Roman politics where backstabbing was a recognized sport. This wasn't just benevolence, it was strategic. Marcus needed Lucius's military acumen to manage the empire's sprawling boundaries and constant threats. The Roman Empire was a beast of territories stretching from the Scottish lowlands to the sands of Egypt, and ruling such a vast domain was no solo gig. Besides, it turns out governance is a lot like group projects. Easier if you can pawn off some work on someone else, but sharing power was like sharing a toga, not particularly comfortable or common. Lucius, with his penchant for luxury and leisure, was often seen as the weaker link. While Marcus was pondering the nature of existence, Lucius was pondering which vintage Roman wine paired best with peacock. Yet, under his party-animal exterior, Lucius was a competent leader, especially on the battlefield. When the Parthians decided to test Rome's mettle in 161 CE with a little invasion of Armenia, Lucius stepped up, trading in his goblet for a gladius. He led the Roman legions to victory in 166 CE, securing a peace that was as much celebrated in the taverns as it was in the Senate. Speaking of celebrations, let's talk economics. War is expensive, and Roman coffers were emptier than a toga pocket after a night out at the Circus Maximus. The cost of constant warfare drained the treasury faster than Lucius could drain a cup of Falernian wine. The Roman economy was a complex beast, reliant on conquest to fuel its expansion and maintain its opulence. With every new territory acquired, Rome gained resources, slaves, and taxes, but the upkeep was monumental. Roads had to be built, legions paid, and walls erected. It's like buying a fixer-upper house that constantly needs repairs, except your contractors carry swords. And then came the Antonine Plague, the uninvited guest at Rome's already crowded party. Around 165 CE, the plague swept through the empire, brought back by returning soldiers from the east. This was no minor sniffle. Historians estimate it killed about 5 million people, roughly a tenth of the empire's population. Lucius himself was among its victims in 169 CE, his death marking the end of the co-emperor experiment. The plague devastated the military, the workforce, and the economy, leaving Marcus to grapple with the fallout. It's hard to philosophize about virtue when you're knee-deep in a public health crisis. Despite these challenges, Marcus remained committed to his Stoic principles, even as the world around him seemed determined to test his resolve. His reign was a delicate balancing act of maintaining borders, managing resources, and keeping the Senate content, a juggling act that would make even the most seasoned circus performer sweat. Marcus's legacy wasn't built on conquest or decadence, but on his steadfast dedication to duty and reason. He penned his thoughts in what would become the famed Meditations, a collection of personal reflections that's as much a self-help book as it is a historical document. It offers insights into the mind of a man trying to stay centered in a world spinning out of control. The dual emperor system may have been an anomaly, but it highlighted a significant shift in Roman leadership. Marcus's willingness to share power and rely on others was an early attempt at a more collaborative form of governance, something that would resonate with future generations. Yet, the realities of his rule were harsh, with economic deficits and a pandemic underscoring the fragility of Rome's grandeur. Marcus Aurelius's reign reminds us that even in the most powerful empires, human and natural forces can append the best-laid plans. As the philosopher emperor navigated these turbulent waters, he was shaping a legacy that would endure long after the marble of the Roman Forum had crumbled. His story is one of resilience, but also of vulnerability, a leader trying to hold an empire together with the threads of philosophy and pragmatism. And while his time on the imperial stage was marked by trials and tribulations, it was also a testament to the power of thought in the face of chaos. The next chapter of his journey would see him facing even greater challenges as the empire continued to test the limits of his endurance and his ideals. But for now, Marcus was proving that even in the face of adversity, a philosopher could indeed wear the crown without losing his mind. Marcus Aurelius's tenure as emperor was like trying to maintain a sandcastle during high tide, constantly battling the forces of nature, politics, and of course, the odd barbarian horde. As he stood at the helm of Rome, the empire seemed determined to test every philosophical principle he held dear, starting with a good, old-fashioned war. The Marcomannic Wars were the main course on Marcus's already overflowing imperial platter. Kicking off around 166 CE, these conflicts were essentially a series of skirmishes with various Germanic tribes who thought Roman Empire looked more like all-you-can-conquer Buffet. Marcus didn't just sit idly by, stroking his philosopher's beard. He rolled up his sleeves, figuratively speaking, of course, since togas don't have sleeves, and got to work. He adopted a hands-on approach, leading his legions on the front lines. If you're picturing an emperor in a shiny chariot barking orders from a throne, think again. Marcus was more likely to be found in a tent, scribbling away in his journal, crafting what would become meditations. Ah, meditations, the philosophical gem that reads like the ancient world's version of a self-help book. Marcus penned these reflections not in the quietude of a library, but amidst the chaos of the battlefield. Imagine trying to contemplate the nature of the universe while dodging arrows and dealing with the logistics of moving tens of thousands of soldiers across Europe. It's like writing a novel during a rock concert, challenging but not impossible for someone with Marcus's unique blend of grit and introspection. But let's not romanticize this too much. The Roman military machine wasn't exactly a poetry club. It was a brutal, efficient force that required relentless discipline and a hefty budget. War costs were staggering. Think millions of denarii, a currency not yet accepted by your local Starbucks. Marcus had to find creative solutions to fund these campaigns, including selling off palace treasures and even devaluing the currency, actions that would give modern economists heart palpitations. The empire's economy was a precarious balancing act, further strained by the need to rebuild after natural disasters like the flooding of the Tiber, which didn't help matters one bit. Yet, in the midst of this economic juggling, Marcus's philosophical musings were his anchor. He wasn't just writing for posterity, he was writing for survival. His reflections on duty, resilience, and the transient nature of life were as much therapy as they were philosophy. It's as if he was saying, yes, my empire is burning, but let's talk about the impermanence of existence. Now, while Marcus was deep in his stoic reflections, the Roman frontier was a powder keg ready to blow. The barbarian tribes weren't just random bands of marauders. They were organized, determined, and increasingly bold due to Rome's internal struggles. These tribes saw the empire's vulnerabilities, the plague-ravaged legions, the stretched resources, and decided it was high time to make their move. Marcus's military campaigns were not mere exercises in expansion, but desperate measures to hold the line. And let's not forget the political undercurrents. Back in Rome, the Senate wasn't just a group of togas debating the finer points of governance. It was a political minefield. Marcus had to navigate these waters carefully, balancing the demands of the Senate with the needs of his army. His decisions often reflected a pragmatic stoicism, a willingness to compromise and adapt, a rare quality in an era where emperors were more likely to solve disputes with a sword than a Senate decree. Marcus's leadership style was nuanced, embodying the duality of his role as both philosopher and warrior. He wasn't just a thinker lost in his thoughts. He was a leader grappling with the harsh realities of his time. His ability to maintain this balance was part of what made his reign so remarkable. However, the romantic image of the philosopher-emperor often glosses over the grittier aspects of his rule, like the harsh enforcement of Roman law and the sometimes ruthless suppression of dissent. The Marcomannic Wars dragged on for over a decade, a relentless grind that tested the mettle of Marcus and his soldiers. Each victory was hard-won, each defeat a reminder of Rome's vulnerabilities. The empire of marble and might was not invincible, and Marcus knew this better than anyone. His campaigns against the Germanic tribes were not just battles for territory, but for the very soul of Rome. Despite the harshness of the military campaigns, Marcus never lost sight of his philosophical ideals. His thoughts on leadership, virtue, and resilience were not just theoretical musings, but principles he actively applied in his governance. He understood that true strength lay not in conquest, but in the ability to endure and adapt, a lesson as relevant today as it was in his time. So, while Marcus Aurelius is often remembered as the philosopher king, it's crucial to recognize the complex tapestry of his reign. He was a man of contradictions, a warrior who valued peace, a ruler who cherished wisdom, a leader who understood the fragility of power. His story is a reminder that even in the most challenging times, the principles of Stoicism can provide a guiding light. As we continue to explore his legacy, we'll see how these ideals shaped not only his reign, but the future of Rome itself. The tale of Marcus Aurelius is far from over, and the challenges he faced would only grow more formidable as his story unfolds. With Marcus Aurelius, life was never a simple stroll down the Appian Way. Beyond the battlefield and Senate debates, this philosopher-emperor faced a medley of personal challenges that would make even the most stoic of us reach for a goblet of Roman wine. Let's not kid ourselves. Leading an empire is tough enough without adding family drama, health woes, and the Herculean task of maintaining a stoic demeanor to the mix. First up, the family dynamics that could rival any modern soap opera. Marcus's marriage to Faustina, the younger, was a political alliance wrapped in a toga, but that doesn't mean it was without its quirks. They had 14 children. Yes, 14. Because apparently Roman emperors operated under the assumption that more heirs meant more stability. Tragically, only a few of their offspring survived into adulthood, a stark reminder of the brutal realities of ancient life, where infant mortality rates were higher than the Colosseum's arches. Faustina was no ordinary empress. Rumors about her fidelity, or lack thereof, swirled around the imperial household like smoke from a Roman chimney. Gossipers claimed she had more lovers than a scroll could list, painting Marcus as the cuckolded philosopher. Whether these stories were the ancient equivalent of tabloid fodder or rooted in some truth, Marcus remained publicly unfazed. Stoicism, after all, teaches the art of indifference to external events, though one wonders if even Marcus occasionally rolled his eyes in private. Now, while managing a brood of children and a potentially wayward wife, Marcus also battled chronic health issues. The man was plagued by a series of ailments that would have sent any mere mortal retreating to the nearest villa for a permanent vacation. From chronic stomach pains to what might have been a form of arthritis, Marcus's body seemed determined to test his philosophical resolve at every turn. But instead of complaining, he famously wrote in his Meditations about bearing pain with courage, a lesson in resilience that would earn him a nod of respect from even the toughest of gladiators. Yet, despite these personal trials, Marcus's stoic persona wasn't just a public facade. He genuinely believed in the principles he espoused, even as Rome seemed to be in a perpetual state of crisis. His ability to keep his cool amid chaos is the stuff of legends, but it's important to remember that even the most unflappable emperor had his limits. The pressures of leadership were immense, and the expectation to embody the perfect philosopher king was a heavy toga to wear. While Marcus was busy riding philosophical musings that would outlive the empire itself, the Roman economy was doing its best impression of a sinking ship. The constant state of war had drained the treasury faster than a chariot on a downhill sprint. Taxation had to be increased, and the denarius, Rome's silver coinage, was devalued. It's hard to ponder the nature of virtue when your citizens are rioting over bread prices. In the midst of these economic woes, the expectation for Marcus to remain the picture of stoic composure was relentless. The myth of the unflappable philosopher king is appealing, but let's be real. No one, not even Marcus, could stay perfectly composed while juggling the myriad challenges of ruling Rome. Behind the stoic facade, there must have been moments of doubt, frustration, and perhaps even a few choice words aimed at the heavens when no one was listening. Beyond the palace walls, the empire continued to face threats from all sides. The Germanic tribes were a persistent thorn in Rome's side, and the eastern provinces required constant attention to keep the Parthians at bay. Marcus's ability to strategize and lead was crucial, but so was his ability to delegate. His reliance on trusted generals and administrators was not just smart governance, it was a necessity. No emperor could be everywhere at once, and Marcus knew the value of a well-placed ally. It's easy to romanticize Marcus Aurelius as the serene philosopher calmly steering the ship of state through turbulent waters. However, the reality was far more nuanced. He was a man deeply aware of his own mortality, often reflecting on the fleeting nature of life. His writings reveal a mind preoccupied with the impermanence of all things, a perspective that likely helped him navigate the ever-shifting sands of imperial politics. In the end, Marcus Aurelius's legacy is a tapestry woven from both his philosophical ideals and the gritty realities of his reign. He was a leader who endeavored to apply Stoic principles in an unforgiving world, a world that tested his ideals with family challenges, health problems, and the constant demands of leadership. Yet, in the face of these trials, Marcus managed to leave a mark as a ruler who valued thoughtfulness over tyranny, wisdom over whimsy. As we continue to explore the life of this philosopher-emperor, it's clear that Marcus Aurelius was a man of many layers. He was not just the thinker lost in his meditations, but a pragmatic leader who understood the complexities of human nature and the unpredictability of fate. His story is one of resilience and adaptability, a narrative that continues to resonate long after the marble of Rome has turned to dust. While Marcus may have strived for Stoic perfection, his humanity, complete with its imperfections, is what endears him to us today. And as the saga of his reign unfolds, it's evident that the challenges he faced only served to sharpen his legacy, leaving us with a richer understanding of what it truly means to lead. As we close the scroll on Marcus Aurelius, let's tackle the elephant in the marble room, his legacy. You see, Marcus wasn't just an emperor with a penchant for deep thoughts. He was the last of the so-called 5 good emperors. His reign wrapped up what historians later called the Pax Romana, a 200-year period of relative peace and stability in the Roman Empire. But here's the kicker. Marcus's death in 180 CE marked the beginning of Rome's slow descent into chaos. It's as if the empire collectively sighed, "Well, that was fun while it lasted," and proceeded to unravel like a Roman toga in a windstorm. Enter Commodus, Marcus's son, who took the imperial baton and promptly tripped over it. Now, was Commodus's reign a failure of paternal guidance or just a tragic case of rotten luck? Let's dig in. Commodus was born into privilege, the heir to an empire at its zenith. But instead of following in his father's stoic footsteps, he seemed more interested in emulating the gladiators he so admired. Historians often paint him as a megalomaniac with a flair for theatrics and a penchant for renaming Rome's months after himself. Hey, if you can't conquer new lands, at least you can conquer the calendar right. But before we throw Commodus entirely under the chariot, let's consider the context. Marcus might have been a philosopher king, but his parenting skills were, let's say, more trial and error than stoic perfection. Balancing the duties of empire with family time isn't easy when you're constantly putting out fires, both literal and metaphorical, across the Roman world. Plus, Marcus's insistence on passing the throne to his biological son was a departure from his predecessors, who had adopted capable successors instead. One could argue this dynastic decision was Marcus's Achilles' heel, leaving Rome in the hands of a ruler who cared more for gladiatorial glory than governance. Commodus's reign, which lasted until 192 CE, was a tumultuous period marked by economic instability, political purges, and an alarming detachment from the empire's pressing issues. He might have seen himself as the reincarnation of Hercules, but in reality, his policies were more destructive than divine. The Senate, once a body Marcus navigated with cautious diplomacy, found itself sidelined and at times terrorized. Political executions became a pastime, and the empire's finances were mismanaged to the point of near ruin. Commodus's reign was a sobering reminder that empire building is a delicate art, one that requires more than just a flair for spectacle. Now, let's pivot back to Marcus and his enduring allure. Why do his writings continue to captivate modern minds? In a world where the latest self-help book is just a click away, Meditations remains as relevant as ever. It's the ancient equivalent of a TED talk, minus the PowerPoint slides. Marcus's reflections offer timeless wisdom on resilience, leadership, and the human condition. His thoughts on finding peace amid chaos resonate with anyone who's ever had a bad day, or, in his case, a bad decade. It's not just philosophers who find solace in his words. Business leaders, athletes, and ordinary folks alike draw inspiration from a man who dared to ponder life's big questions while the empire around him teetered on the brink. Sure, there's a romanticized halo around Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who stood firm in the face of adversity. But let's not gloss over the realities. His reign was fraught with challenges, from barbarian invasions to economic strain. The Roman Empire, despite its grandeur, was a colossal beast teetering on the edge of instability. Marcus's ability to keep it from toppling over entirely was part wisdom, part sheer stubbornness. He wasn't just a man of letters. He was a man of action, willing to make tough decisions to preserve the empire's integrity. And what of the empire itself after Marcus? The Pax Romana may have ended with his death, but his ideals lingered on like a philosophical spectre. Even as Rome slipped into a series of less-than-stellar emperors, Marcus's influence persisted. His focus on duty and reason became a benchmark for future rulers, even as they failed to live up to his standards. His legacy is a complex tapestry, woven from both his writings and his actions, a reminder that greatness is often a mix of high ideals and practical governance. In the grand narrative of history, Marcus Aurelius stands out not just for his intellect, but for his humanity. He was a leader who grappled with the same existential questions we ponder today, albeit with a bit more marble in the mix. His story is a testament to the power of thought in an age defined by conquest and chaos. And while his empire may have crumbled, his words endure, a beacon of wisdom for those who dare to lead with both heart and mind. So, as we bid farewell to our philosopher emperor, let's remember him for what he was. A man who strove to balance the scales of power and philosophy in a world that often demanded more than any one person could give. Marcus Aurelius's life and legacy continue to echo through the ages, a reminder that even in times of uncertainty, a thoughtful mind can inspire change. Whether it's guiding an empire or simply navigating the complexities of modern life, Marcus's reflections offer a timeless roadmap, a call to find strength in reason and resilience in the face of adversity. And perhaps that is the greatest legacy of all. In a world where military uniforms were the Instagram accounts of the early 20th century, a way to show off one's style and ambition, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk was already a trendsetter. Born in 1881 in the bustling port city of Thessaloniki, part of the fading Ottoman Empire, young Mustafa was far from the average kid. Thessaloniki was a melting pot of cultures, teeming with Greeks, Jews, Slavs, and Turks all vying for space and influence. It's no wonder that Atatürk developed a knack for navigating complex social landscapes, a skill he'd later wield like a master chess player. Education was Mustafa's ticket out of the chaos. His father, Ali Reza, a man with more business ventures than successful ones, had grand ambitions for his son. Unfortunately, Ali Reza passed away when Mustafa was just 7, leaving his mother, Zubid Hanim, to steer the family ship. She insisted on a religious education, but young Mustafa was more intrigued by the secular, military-focused schooling his father had envisioned. Cue the classic family drama. Mustafa sneaked off to attend the Shemsi Effendi School, a progressive institution that fostered his inquisitive mind. By 1893, he had his sights set on the Monastir Military High School, where he earned the nickname Kemal from a teacher impressed by his intellect. Mustafa Kemal, as he was now known, had a penchant for reinventing himself. Think of it as the early 20th century version of updating your social media handle to something cooler. Fast forward to 1905, and Mustafa Kemal is a freshly minted graduate of the Ottoman Military Academy in Istanbul. The Ottoman Empire was a sinking ship, and young officers like Kemal were eager to plug the leaks. His first post in Damascus was less than glamorous, involving more bureaucratic drudgery than battlefield heroics. But even then, Kemal had a knack for stirring the pot. He co-founded the Fatherland and Liberty Society, a secretive group focused on reforming the empire. Not quite the Illuminati, but it was enough to raise eyebrows. By 1908, Kemal was in the thick of the Young Turk Revolution, a movement that promised to bring constitutional reform to the Ottoman Empire. It was all very romantic, a band of idealists fighting to save their homeland. In reality, it was more like trying to patch a sinking boat with duct tape. Yet, Mustafa Kemal stood out, not just for his military acumen, but for his ability to inspire those around him. His peers were drawn to his charisma, as if he had the gravitational pull of a small planet. Through the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913, Kemal proved himself a capable commander, even as the empire was losing territory like a gambler on a losing streak. It was during these tumultuous years that his leadership skills truly shone. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a strategist, someone who could see the bigger picture amid the chaos of battle. The real turning point, however, came during World War I, specifically at Gallipoli in 1915. The Allies, confident in their naval superiority, launched an audacious campaign to knock the Ottomans out of the war. What they didn't count on was Mustafa Kemal, the man with a plan, and a few thousand very determined troops. Kemal's foresight and decisive action at Gallipoli turned a potential disaster into a celebrated victory. His famous order to his soldiers, "I am not ordering you to fight, I am ordering you to die," is the kind of thing that would make a motivational poster if it weren't so darkly absurd. Gallipoli cemented his status as a national hero, but it also highlighted the Ottoman Empire's dire need for modernization. The empire was like an old car sputtering on its last fumes, and Kemal knew it needed more than just a tune-up. He had a vision for a new Turkey, secular, progressive, and independent from the Sultan's antiquated rule. After the war, as the Ottoman Empire disintegrated, Mustafa Kemal saw an opportunity. The Treaty of Sevres in 1920 carved up the empire like a Thanksgiving turkey, leaving the Turks with little more than scraps. But Kemal wasn't about to let his homeland be reduced to a footnote in history. He spearheaded the Turkish War of Independence, rallying the people with the kind of fervor usually reserved for sports teams or pop idols. By 1923, Kemal had not only led Turkey to independence, but also helped establish the Republic of Turkey, with himself as its first president. It was a role he was born to play, and one he took on with gusto. But don't think for a second that this was the end of his name-changing antics. In 1934, he adopted the surname Atatürk, meaning Father of the Turks, a title bestowed upon him by the Turkish parliament, a move that was as much about branding as it was about national pride. Atatürk's story is one of relentless ambition and transformation, both for himself and his country. He was a man who understood the power of reinvention, not just in name, but in purpose. As Turkey's founding father, he left a legacy of modernization that continues to shape the nation today. And while the myth of Atatürk is certainly larger than life, the reality of his journey is a testament to the complexities and contradictions of leadership. Having set the stage for a new Turkey with the establishment of the Republic in 1923, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk wasn't about to rest on his laurels. Let's face it, the Ottoman Sultanate was like that ancient couch your roommate refuses to get rid of. Historically significant, sure, but also a little too worn out for modern tastes. Atatürk knew that for Turkey to strut into the 20th century with confidence, the Sultanate had to go. It was time for some political spring cleaning. The abolition of the Ottoman Sultanate in November 1922 was a masterclass in political maneuvering. Picture a smoke-filled room where the aroma of Turkish coffee mingles with the sharp scent of ambition. Atatürk, with his steel-blue eyes and unyielding resolve, was the conductor of this symphony of change. In a move that would make even the most seasoned poker players nod in approval, he managed to outmaneuver rivals and convince the Turkish Grand National Assembly to ditch the Sultanate. It was like telling the old Ottoman Guard, "Thanks for the memories, but we're going for a hard reset." But how did Atatürk pull this off without the whole thing going up in flames? For one, he wielded his charisma like a scalpel. People didn't just listen to him. They were captivated, drawn in by a vision of a secular, progressive future. His ability to navigate these treacherous political waters was akin to a tightrope walker performing without a net. A misstep could mean disaster, but Atatürk made it look effortless. It wasn't just about charm, though. Atatürk understood the importance of timing and leverage. The Ottoman Empire's defeat in World War had left it a shadow of its former self, more of a museum exhibit than a political powerhouse. The Treaty of Sevres had sliced and diced the empire with the precision of a sushi chef, leaving the Sultanate as little more than a ceremonial relic. With the Sultanate's political clout reduced to a whisper, Atatürk's proposition to abolish it seemed less like a radical overhaul and more like a logical progression. Yet, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The transition from an empire to a republic was a seismic shift, akin to convincing a die-hard vinyl collector to switch to Spotify. There were late-night debates that stretched into the wee hours, fueled by copious amounts of coffee and the occasional fiery exchange. Atatürk's cabinet meetings were legendary for their intensity, as ministers hashed out the details of a new legal and educational framework while grappling with the remnants of an imperial mindset. In the midst of all this, Atatürk's strategic prowess shone through. He had the foresight to cultivate a loyal base of supporters. Think of it as an early version of a political fan club. These were individuals who believed in his vision of a modern, secular Turkey, and who were willing to put in the elbow grease to make it happen. Atatürk's inner circle included military leaders, intellectuals, and reform-minded politicians, all of whom shared his commitment to dragging Turkey into the modern age, whether it liked it or not. Now, let's bust a myth or two. One might romanticize the fall of the Sultanate as a swift, decisive act of rebellion, like the toppling of a tyrant in a blockbuster movie. But the truth is more nuanced. The abolition was as much about pragmatic politics as it was about visionary leadership. Atatürk was acutely aware that clinging to the Sultanate was like trying to keep a defunct phone line open in the age of smartphones. For Turkey to thrive, it needed to shed its imperial baggage and embrace a republic that reflected contemporary realities. As the dust settled on the newly minted republic, Atatürk's eyes were firmly on the presidency, a role he was practically destined for. But this wasn't just a vanity project. Atatürk genuinely believed that his leadership was necessary to guide Turkey through its growing pains. He had already demonstrated an uncanny ability to keep his cool under pressure, a skill that would prove invaluable as he set about reshaping Turkey's social, political, and economic landscape. Amidst the chaos of nation-building, one could forgive Atatürk for occasionally questioning his own sanity. The challenges were immense, transforming a deeply religious society into a secular state, overhauling archaic legal systems, and kickstarting a stagnant economy. It was like trying to renovate a house while the residents were still living in it, complete with all their old furniture and habits. Yet, Atatürk's wit and humor often lightened the load. Known for his sharp tongue, he once quipped about a particularly obstinate political opponent. "He's like a stubborn mule, except less useful." His knack for cutting through political noise with a well-timed joke or a pointed observation was part of what made him such an effective leader. It was his way of reminding everyone, including himself, that even the most serious business of statecraft didn't have to be devoid of levity. So there he was, a man standing at the crossroads of history, a nation balanced precariously on the edge of modernity. Atatürk's presidency would be a crucible, testing not only his vision but his endurance. The world was watching, and Turkey's future was anything but certain. But if anyone could steer this ship through uncharted waters, it was Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. With a map in one hand and a compass in the other, he was ready to chart a course for a new era, one late-night debate and coffee cup at a time. As Atatürk settled into his presidential role, he was less about basking in glory and more about rolling up his sleeves for an overhaul that would make a pit crew blush. If Turkey was going to step onto the world's stage without tripping over its own shoelaces, it needed more than a new coat of paint. It required a foundation rebuilt from the ground up. Cue Atatürk's ambitious reform agenda, a laundry list of changes that would make even the most seasoned bureaucrat reach for an aspirin. First up on the docket, education. Atatürk knew that a nation couldn't thrive if its citizens were stuck in the educational equivalent of a medieval time loop. So, he spearheaded a radical reform in 1924, turning schools into secular institutions free from religious control. A bold move considering the deeply entrenched religious traditions. Picture this. Over 4,000 religious schools and 30 madrasas were shuttered, replaced by an education system where science and rational thought were the new gospel. But Atatürk wasn't done. He understood that language was the key to unifying a nation, and the Ottoman Turkish script with its Arabic roots was more of a tangled mess than a coherent system. So, in 1928, he flipped the script, literally. The adoption of the Latin alphabet was nothing short of revolutionary, turning the act of writing into a nationwide brain-teaser. Overnight, the Turkish language shed its old skin, and with it, the literacy rate was expected to leap from a dismal 10% to a more respectable 70% within a few decades. Talk about ambitious. This was the educational equivalent of trying to teach your grandma to Snapchat. Now, let's sprinkle in some humor. The transition wasn't exactly a typo-free process. Imagine a nation of people playing a linguistic version of musical chairs, with new letters and sounds popping up like surprise guests at a birthday party. Teachers were hastily trained, and by hastily, I mean they got a crash course in the new alphabet before being sent off to spread the gospel of Latin letters. Atatürk himself took to the streets, chalk in hand, teaching the new script to anyone who'd listen. It was like the ultimate pop-up classroom, except Atatürk wasn't exactly handing out diplomas. The legal system was next on Atatürk's hit list. The old Ottoman laws were about as relevant as a rotary phone in a world of smartphones. In 1926, he introduced a civil code inspired by the Swiss, a penal code borrowed from the Italians, and a commercial code that tipped its hat to the Germans. The patchwork quilt of legal reform was stitched together with one goal in mind: create a modern legal framework that respected individual rights and equality. Women, who were once considered legal minors, gained the right to divorce and inherit property. It was a seismic shift, akin to moving from the Stone Age to the space race in one giant leap. But let's not get too starry-eyed. The myth of smooth transition often glosses over the wrinkles. Implementing these changes was like trying to teach a cat to fetch, a noble endeavor, but not without its fair share of hissing and clawing. The old guard didn't just roll over, they pushed back, questioning the abandonment of traditional values in favor of Western ideals. Atatürk's reforms were met with skepticism, resistance, and sometimes outright hostility. Yet, Atatürk was nothing if not persistent. He wielded his charisma like a maestro conducts an orchestra, orchestrating a symphony of change that resonated across the nation. His reforms were a masterclass in both audacity and pragmatism, each one a calculated move designed to ensure Turkey's survival in a rapidly modernizing world. And while the romance of a nation reborn is compelling, the reality was a complex dance of negotiation, compromise, and the occasional political arm-twisting. Economically, Turkey was like a toddler taking its first steps, wobbly, but determined. Atatürk knew that for his vision to take root, the economy needed a jump-start. So, he implemented a series of economic policies aimed at reducing foreign dependency and fostering industrial growth. It was a Herculean task, akin to turning a horse-drawn carriage into a sleek sports car. By the mid-1930s, state-owned factories were popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, producing everything from textiles to sugar. Atatürk's economic strategy wasn't just about numbers on a ledger. It was about fostering a sense of national pride and self-sufficiency. However, it wasn't without its quirks. The push for industrialization sometimes led to a build it, and they will come mentality, with factories occasionally opening in places where demand was more of a hopeful whisper than a roar. But that was part of the charm, the boldness of a nation finding its footing, even if it occasionally stumbled. As Turkey hurtled forward, Atatürk's reforms continued to shape its identity, each one a stepping stone toward a future that balanced tradition with progress. The alphabet change, the educational overhaul, the legal metamorphosis, they were all pieces of a larger puzzle, each essential in crafting a nation that could hold its own on the world stage. But let's not wrap things up just yet. There's more to explore, more layers to uncover, and more myths to bust about the man who dared to dream big in an era of small minds. The story of Atatürk's Turkey is far from over, and as we peek into the next chapter, it's clear that the journey is as compelling as the destination. So, stay tuned. There's plenty more to unravel in the tale of a nation reborn, and a leader who refused to settle for anything less than transformation. As we delve deeper into the whirlwind of reforms that Mustafa Kemal Atatürk orchestrated, it's clear that he wasn't just rearranging the furniture. He was building a new house from the ground up. Let's start with the social reforms that would make even the most progressive of today's politicians do a double take. First on Atatürk's agenda was the liberation of women from the confines of outdated societal norms. In the 1920s and 30s, Turkey was a land where traditional roles were as rigid as an Ottoman divan. But Atatürk, with his eye on a future that didn't look like a historical reenactment, was having none of it. Think of him as a feminist avant-la-lettre, a man who saw gender equality not just as a nice-to-have, but as a cornerstone of a modern state. Let's talk numbers. In 1930, women were granted the right to vote in municipal elections. By 1934, they could vote in national elections, and stand for parliament. This was a seismic shift, especially considering that some Western countries were still treating women's suffrage like a distant cousin they barely acknowledged. When the dust settled in the 1935 elections, 18 women took their seats in the Turkish parliament, a figure that might not seem earth-shattering today, but was revolutionary at the time. Then, there was the matter of attire. Enter the hat law of 1925, one of Atatürk's most infamous reforms. This wasn't just about swapping a fez for a fedora. It was a symbolic gesture meant to signify a break from the Ottoman past and an embrace of Western modernity. The fez, that iconic rounded hat, was more than just a fashion statement. It was a marker of identity, of tradition. Atatürk saw it as a tether to a past Turkey needed to move beyond. Now, let's be real. Changing hats doesn't sound like the stuff of revolution, but Atatürk's hat law was a cultural earthquake. Imagine if overnight everyone had to swap their baseball caps for berets. The law mandated that all male citizens adopt Western-style hats, and non-compliance wasn't just a fashion faux pas. It could land you in hot water, with penalties ranging from fines to imprisonment. Yes, you heard that right. Fashion police became a literal thing. Of course, the hat law wasn't just about headgear. It symbolized the broader cultural shift Atatürk was pushing for, a Turkey that looked westward not only in its clothes, but in its values. Yet, the romantic notion of a nation unified under the brim of a new hat glosses over the reality. The law sparked significant resistance, especially in rural areas where the fez was seen as a symbol of religious and cultural identity. For many, it wasn't just about changing hats, it was about changing a way of life. This brings us to a broader point. Atatürk's reforms were as much about perception as they were about policy. He understood the power of symbols and the importance of a national identity that could unite a diverse populace under a single modern banner. But even as he crafted this new identity, Atatürk was keenly aware of the economic realities that underpinned his vision. Take, for instance, the push for industrialization. Atatürk's administration was keen to reduce Turkey's reliance on foreign imports and develop a self-sufficient economy. By the late 1930s, state-owned enterprises were producing steel, textiles, and chemicals, a concrete step towards an economy that wasn't just a cog in someone else's machine. The economic landscape was changing, but it wasn't happening in a vacuum. These industrial efforts were part of a broader strategy to ensure that every Turkish citizen had a stake in the nation's prosperity. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was no easy feat. Transforming an agrarian economy into an industrial powerhouse is like trying to teach a dog to do calculus. It required not just infrastructure, but education, training, and a workforce ready to embrace change. And while Atatürk's vision was grand, the execution was fraught with challenges. Economic growth didn't happen overnight, and there were plenty of stumbles along the way. So, was Atatürk a flawless visionary, or was he more akin to a stubborn innovator, unafraid to break a few eggs to make an omelette? The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. His reforms were bold, necessary, and at times disruptive. They challenged the status quo and pushed Turkey towards a future that was as uncertain as it was promising. In the end, Atatürk was a leader who understood that modernization wasn't just a policy, it was a mindset. His efforts to redefine Turkey's social fabric were as much about challenging perceptions as they were about changing laws. And while the romanticized version of his reforms tells a story of a nation reborn, the reality was more nuanced. It was a tale of resistance, adaptation, and the occasional stumble on the path to progress. As we leave Atatürk at this juncture, his reforms still echo through Turkey's social and economic corridors. The story isn't over, and the next chapter promises even more twists and turns. So, hang tight. We're not finished exploring the legacy of a leader who dared to dream big and act even bigger. As we wrap up our whirlwind tour of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk's transformative reign, it's time to take a step back and survey the landscape he left behind, a patchwork of triumphs, trials, and the occasional eyebrow-raising fashion choice. Atatürk's reforms weren't just footnotes in history. They were seismic shifts that redefined a nation. Yet, as with any grand vision, the execution was a cocktail of brilliance and blunders. Let's dive into the myth versus reality of Atatürk's legacy. The man is often portrayed as a heroic figure, a founding father who single-handedly dragged Turkey out of its Ottoman slumber and into the bright lights of modernity. And yes, there is a kernel of truth to that narrative, but let's not get carried away with the hero worship just yet. Atatürk was a complex character, a leader who understood that change often comes with a price tag, sometimes a hefty one. Take the economic overhaul, for instance. Atatürk's push for industrialization was like trying to get a steam engine to compete in a Formula One race. It was ambitious, bold, and not without its hiccups. The state-owned enterprises he established were a double-edged sword. While they did kickstart Turkey's economy, they also led to inefficiencies and a bloated bureaucracy. By the time Atatürk passed away in 1938, Turkey's economy was a curious mix of progress and growing pains. Then there's the matter of secularism, a cornerstone of Atatürk's vision. His push to separate religion from state affairs was revolutionary for a nation deeply steeped in Islamic traditions. But let's not romanticize the process. The shift was about as smooth as a roller coaster ride, filled with twists, turns, and the occasional stomach-dropping plunge. Atatürk's secular reforms were met with resistance, especially from rural areas where religion was as much a part of daily life as tea and conversation. Yet, Atatürk pressed on, believing that a secular state was essential for Turkey to compete on the global stage. But let's not ignore the personal cost of these grand ambitions. Atatürk was, by all accounts, a workaholic, the kind of leader who poured himself into his vision with relentless energy. His health suffered as a result, with liver disease ultimately claiming him at the age of 57. It's worth noting that the man had a fondness for raki, a potent Turkish spirit that, when consumed in the quantities Atatürk reportedly favored, could knock out a horse. One can't help but wonder if the man himself would have raised a glass to the irony of his own health being undermined by a drink so emblematic of the Turkish lifestyle he helped to modernize. As we consider Atatürk's legacy, it's clear that his reforms left an indelible mark on Turkey. Yet, the real cost of modernization, a nation grappling with its identity, its past, and its future, continues to reverberate. Atatürk's vision was a double-edged sword, cutting through the old to make way for the new, but leaving a trail of challenges that Turkey still navigates today. Fast forward to the present, and Atatürk's image looms large, whether as a symbol of national pride or a lightning rod for debate. His portrait hangs in schools, government buildings, and even some homes, a constant reminder of the man who reshaped a nation. Yet the conversation around his legacy is as lively and contentious as a late-night debate fueled by strong coffee and stronger opinions. So, what would Atatürk think of Turkey today? It's a question that invites speculation, kind of historical what-if that historians and armchair analysts alike can't resist. Would he be satisfied with the progress, or would he see areas where his vision has faltered? It's impossible to say definitively, but one imagines Atatürk, ever the pragmatist, would appreciate the ongoing effort to balance tradition with modernity, a tension that he knew all too well. In the end, Atatürk's story is a testament to the messy, complicated business of nation building. His legacy is a tapestry woven with threads of innovation, controversy, and enduring questions about identity and progress. And while the man himself may have exited the stage nearly a century ago, his influence continues to echo through Turkey's political, social, and cultural corridors. As we draw the curtain on this chapter of history, one last nod to Atatürk's love for raki seems fitting. It's a reminder that even the most formidable figures are, at their core, human, prone to the same vices and vulnerabilities as the rest of us. So here's to Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, a leader who dared to dream big, a man who wasn't afraid to shake things up, and a figure whose legacy is as complex as the nation he helped to forge. Cheers to that.